Under the silent stretch of deep space, far beyond the reach of ordinary telescopes, a shimmer of reflected sunlight caught the attention of the automated eyes of the Atlas survey. The object, catalogued as 3I Atlas, was already a point of fascination for astronomers, an interstellar wanderer that had entered the solar system from another star. Like its famous predecessors, Oumuamua and Borisov, it was a messenger from beyond, a fragment of the unknown. But this time something far stranger occurred. Instruments detected an intense flash. Something massive had just collided with 3I Atlas. Within moments, NASA's monitoring systems were flooded with anomalous data, and across the deep space network, alarms signaled that something unprecedented had happened. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. The impact was recorded first as a burst of light, followed by a spike in high-energy particles spreading through the void. Observatories around the world turned their gaze toward the coordinates, and what they saw was staggering. The object, an interstellar traveler already rare enough in human observation, had just been struck by something else moving at cosmic velocity. It wasn't debris from the solar system, it was something unknown, traveling so fast that its origin could not be traced to any known gravitational trajectory. The brightness of the collision temporarily exceeded that of nearby stars, a tiny nova-like bloom in the vast dark. For NASA's astrophysicists, the implications were immediate and extraordinary. An impact of that magnitude in interstellar space defied statistical probability. The odds of two extrasolar bodies meeting within the tiny volume of the solar system were nearly incalculable. Yet the data was irrefutable. Space-based telescopes recorded a debris plume expanding thousands of kilometers across, its core radiating in a spectral signature that hinted at materials never before seen in any solar system body. The spectroscopic fingerprints revealed a mix of heavy elements and exotic compounds, some with molecular bonds that didn't fit known chemical behavior under natural conditions. The more scientists looked, the more unsettling it became. 3I Atlas had been moving in a hyperbolic orbit, its speed marking it as an interstellar interloper, unbound by the sun's gravity. After the impact, its trajectory shifted subtly, but unmistakably. It wasn't merely deflected, it behaved as though something within it had been triggered. What had appeared to be an inert, icy body suddenly emitted electromagnetic radiation in pulses, regular patterned bursts that defied explanation. NASA's Deep Space Network recorded them as rhythmic emissions, each lasting precisely 7 seconds, repeating for hours before fading into background noise. At first, the assumption was natural resonance, a rotation-induced modulation of reflected sunlight. But the frequencies didn't match the expected optical patterns. They were radio signals, narrow-band emissions in an artificial range, cutting cleanly through the noise of the cosmos. For hours, data scientists argued over calibration errors, but the results were consistent across independent observatories. Whatever had struck 3I Atlas had awakened something, or released something embedded within it. The object's composition before the impact had already puzzled researchers. Unlike Borisov, which resembled a typical comet, or Oumuamua, whose behavior challenged known models of propulsion and reflectivity, 3I Atlas exhibited hybrid characteristics. Its surface had both icy volatiles and metallic fragments. The collision, however, vaporized part of the crust, exposing a dense, reflective interior with a near-perfect albedo. Light didn't scatter randomly. It was redirected as though by a structured surface. When spectrometers analyzed the reflected sunlight, the reading suggested a lattice-like geometry at the microscopic scale, almost crystalline, but with organization beyond natural crystallography. NASA scientists, accustomed to erring on the side of physics, struggled to classify what they were seeing. One senior analyst compared the internal patterns to photonic circuits, microscopic pathways capable of channeling light. If that were true, it implied a level of structural precision not found in natural mineral formation. Still, no one dared say the word artificial out loud. It lingered unspoken in every discussion, hovering like static in the air. The energy released by the collision reverberated across the solar system in measurable ways. Particle detectors aboard the Parker Solar Probe picked up a faint echo, a stream of energized ions with a unique isotopic signature. These particles appeared to have originated from the collision site, yet they behaved differently from cosmic rays or solar emissions. Their decay curves didn't match any known atomic isotope. Something new had entered the heliosphere, riding on invisible currents of charged dust. Ground-based radio telescopes in Chile and Hawaii recorded a faint whisper following the initial bursts, patterns that seemed too deliberate to dismiss as coincidence. When data was run through pattern recognition algorithms, sequences emerged that mirrored prime numbers, suggesting ordered repetition. Some researchers dismissed it as data compression artifacts. Others weren't so sure. In internal discussions, NASA physicists referred to the event as the Singularity Flash, an informal nickname that captured both the awe and the confusion surrounding it. The timing of the impact was uncanny. 3I Atlas had been approaching its perihelion, the point closest to the Sun, where solar heating would cause volatile compounds to vaporize, producing a tail. But instead of the expected brightening, the object dimmed after the collision, as though absorbing more light than it reflected. This inversion of expected behavior deepened the mystery. Infrared telescopes recorded a cooling trend, not a heating one. It was as though the object was drawing in thermal energy, redistributing it internally, rather than radiating it into space. This behavior led to speculation about energy absorption mechanisms unknown to modern science. Some astrophysicists proposed that the impact had activated a phase transition, perhaps a transformation of matter under extreme energy density. Others suggested it might be a relic of interstellar engineering, a fragment of some distant civilization's technology that had drifted for eons before entering our region of space. The more cautious voices reminded everyone that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Yet, as the data poured in, ordinary explanations evaporated. The debris field itself told another story. When high-resolution imaging from the James Webb Space Telescope became available, it revealed shards spreading in a peculiar pattern, symmetrical, almost fractal. Instead of random dispersal, the fragments appeared arranged along spiraling arms, each equidistant from a central point. That geometric precision was nearly impossible to attribute to chance. The structure looked deliberate, as if the impact had triggered a controlled disassembly rather than a chaotic explosion. Researchers studying the event began to reconsider the nature of 3I Atlas altogether. Perhaps it was never a comet or asteroid in the traditional sense. Its elongated shape, the reflective core, the anomalous radio bursts, all suggested an origin beyond natural formation. If it was an artifact, the question became, of what and from whom? And what could have struck it with such force in interstellar space? The object that collided with 3I Atlas left behind no visible trace beyond the energy bloom. No fragment, no secondary trajectory, nothing detectable remained. It was as though the collider had vaporized upon impact, or merged entirely with its target. That disappearance added to the unease. If the impactor carried energy or mass sufficient to produce such an effect, it should have left measurable gravitational influence, yet instruments detected none. Whatever it was, it had come and gone in a heartbeat, altering 3I Atlas in ways no one could predict. In the days following the event, NASA's data analysis centers worked without pause. Deep space tracking arrays recalculated the object's orbit, revealing a subtle but unmistakable acceleration away from the Sun, an acceleration inconsistent with gravitational mechanics alone. Radiation pressure from sunlight could not account for it, nor could outgassing or thermal recoil. It was as though 3I Atlas was being propelled by some internal mechanism. The analogy to Oumuamua was immediate, but this time the phenomenon was accompanied by energy emissions that were measurable and direct. Spectral imaging captured pulses of ultraviolet light emanating from the object's surface, each pulse consistent with high-frequency electrical discharge. The intervals were consistent, not random, and exhibited modulation, signs of information encoding. Computer models attempted to decipher the sequences, but the data resisted simple translation. The signals were too complex, containing layers of harmonic frequency shifts that suggested purposeful structure. To those observing, it felt as though something ancient and sleeping had been struck awake. The scale of the discovery sent ripples through the astronomical community. This was not merely a matter of cosmic curiosity. It was a potential window into the nature of interstellar matter, or perhaps into the remnants of intelligent creations scattered across the galaxy. For decades, scientists had theorized that if advanced civilizations existed, Their artifacts might drift between stars long after their makers had vanished. 3. I-Atlas, post-impact, seem to embody that theory in spectacular fashion. The notion that two interstellar objects could collide within our solar system carried staggering implications for cosmic density models. It suggested that the interstellar medium, once thought nearly empty, might be more populated with debris, relics, or remnants than previously assumed. If even one of these objects carried technological properties, it could mean that civilizations once littered the stars with constructs that now wander aimlessly through the void. The solar system, by chance, had become the stage for one of these relics to meet its fate. Among the many mysteries that emerged, one particular dataset captivated researchers. The radio bursts emitted after the collision displayed frequency drift corresponding precisely to the rotational vector of the object. This synchronization hinted at deliberate alignment, an emission pattern locked to its spin axis. That kind of correlation wasn't natural for debris ejections or resonance oscillations. It was instead characteristic of controlled modulation, like a beacon. Theoretical physicists speculated about what could generate such emissions naturally. Magnetized plasma sheaths, quantum spin alignment, or piezoelectric resonance under extreme stress were all proposed. Yet none could sustain the precision of the signal for the observed duration. Even stranger, the amplitude decayed exponentially with mathematical exactness, as though governed by an algorithmic function rather than physical dissipation. To some, it felt like watching the shutdown sequence of a machine. For NASA's engineers and data scientists, the challenge became one of interpretation rather than detection. What did it mean that a supposedly inert interstellar rock could emit structured signals after an impact? What kind of material could store energy for eons and release it so coherently? And how could such an object survive the journey between stars, enduring radiation, micrometeorite bombardment, and gravitational shearing, only to reveal its secrets after a collision in our solar system? Astrochemists turned their attention to the spectral residue left in the debris field. Among familiar compounds like silicates and carbonaceous material, they found traces of elements in ratios unseen anywhere else, particularly isotopes of nickel and titanium arranged in anomalous crystalline matrices. The bonding patterns suggested manufacturing under conditions of pressure and temperature beyond natural astrophysical processes. These findings hinted at metallurgy of cosmic origin, possibly the byproduct of technologies capable of manipulating atomic lattices with quantum precision. In the vast expanse of data, one recurring anomaly stood out. Every time the object's residual emissions peaked, Earth's ionosphere registered faint but measurable disturbances, as though the signals were interacting with the planet's electromagnetic field. The effect was minute, well within background fluctuations, but the synchronization could not be ignored. The pulses from 3I Atlas arrived with mathematical regularity, like clockwork from across the void. It was a reminder that even across billions of kilometers, energy connects all things. At the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, analysts modeled the impact dynamics, running countless simulations to understand how such a collision could produce the observed effects. None of the models fit. The energy release was too clean, the angular momentum too precise, the resulting emission too consistent. When they inverted the model, assuming the object had absorbed rather than lost kinetic energy, the results matched almost perfectly. That inversion suggested a property unknown to conventional matter: negative kinetic coupling, a phenomenon predicted in theoretical physics but never observed. It implied that the impactor's energy might have been converted directly into internal structural activation, rather than heat or fragmentation. The idea sent shivers through the scientific community. If 3I Atlas possessed materials capable of that kind of energy transformation, it was far beyond anything humanity could manufacture. Such technology could represent an entirely new state of matter, metastable structures capable of storing and redistributing energy across quantum lattices. For NASA, it was a paradigm shift, forcing reconsideration of the limits of material science, energy dynamics, and perhaps even the origins of matter itself. The geometry of the fragments provided further clues. Some shards exhibited smooth curvature at microscopic scales resembling aerodynamic shaping. Others contained voids arranged in harmonic ratios, similar to acoustic resonators. These features had no function in natural celestial formation. They looked designed. Yet, in the absence of definitive proof, the team refrained from conclusions. Still, one internal report quietly noted, if the object was constructed, the builders possessed an understanding of energy and matter integration far exceeding human comprehension. The light curve of 3I Atlas following the collision revealed another enigma. Over successive observations, the brightness oscillated periodically, not chaotically as expected from tumbling debris. It was as though the remaining structure had stabilized itself, maintaining orientation toward a fixed reference point. The reference was not the Sun nor Earth, but a vector extending toward the galactic core. The alignment persisted for days, precise within fractions of a degree. Such sustained targeting in the absence of propulsion suggested an internal gyroscopic system, or a magnetic alignment mechanism still functioning after the impact. This discovery reignited speculation that 3I Atlas was once part of a larger construct, perhaps a vessel, probe, or fragment of an engineered system designed for interstellar travel. The implications of that were staggering. If it had been traveling between stars, it must have done so for millennia, maybe longer, enduring cosmic radiation and interstellar dust without disintegration. That endurance alone implied materials and engineering beyond any known technology. The collision, then, might have revealed only a glimpse of its dormant nature. As instruments continued to observe, faint trails of ionized gas formed a spiral around the object's core, glowing softly in ultraviolet wavelengths. The spiral was not random. It conformed to logarithmic patterns common in natural growth and energy flow. Yet the consistency was too perfect. Mathematicians analyzing the formation noted that the spacing between the spiral arms matched Fibonacci ratios within measurable precision. Nature loves such patterns, but in cosmic debris fields, they do not appear with that degree of regularity. It was as though the object itself was self-organizing, redistributing its material in accordance with underlying mathematical laws. Speculative physics papers emerged rapidly, suggesting that the object might be a self-regulating nanostructure, capable of maintaining equilibrium through feedback loops on a quantum scale. Others posited it was a relic of an ancient civilization's propulsion system, perhaps a fragment of a drive core that once harnessed stellar energy. Each theory fed the next, each more daring than the last. NASA's own internal memos reflected a mix of exhilaration and disbelief. Every new dataset deepened the mystery rather than resolving it. Astronomers noticed another peculiarity. As 3I Atlas moved farther from the Sun, its acceleration continued, not diminishing as radiation pressure would dictate, but increasing slightly. The direction of acceleration remained constant, not radial from the Sun, but angled toward interstellar space. Whatever force was driving it appeared to be independent of solar energy. It was as though the collision had reactivated a dormant mechanism, propelling it once again toward the endless dark between stars. By this point, the scientific community was split. Some argued for restraint, insisting on natural explanations rooted in physics. Others believed humanity had just witnessed the awakening of an artifact older than recorded history. The data refused to fit into familiar categories. Each new observation peeled back a layer of the impossible. The fact that the object had emitted structured radio frequencies could not be easily dismissed, nor could the geometric debris patterns or the sustained acceleration. The spectroscopic analysis of the debris revealed traces of compounds resembling complex polymers, but not organic ones. These were hybrid materials, part metallic, part ceramic, with conductivity and flexibility that defied expectation. On Earth, such materials would require precision nanofabrication at atomic scales. Their discovery in the remains of an interstellar body raised the question of how many other objects drifting between stars might harbor similar secrets. The shock within NASA was palpable. Teams accustomed to measuring the distant echoes of creation suddenly found themselves confronting evidence of something that looked disturbingly like intention. Instruments designed for observation had become witnesses to what might be the first direct sign of non-natural structure beyond Earth. Though no one could say for certain what had hit 3I Atlas or why, the event had peeled back a curtain offering a fleeting glimpse into the deep architectures of the cosmos. Architectures that might once have been built, not born. Throughout the weeks that followed, data streams from satellites, observatories, and deep space probes were combed for additional anomalies. Traces of unusual radiation persisted longer than expected, tapering slowly as 3I Atlas drifted farther out. The pulses weakened, fading into cosmic background noise, but the memory of what had been seen lingered. For those who studied it, the event marked a dividing line in humanity's understanding of interstellar phenomena. The collision was not just a physical impact. It was a collision between ignorance and possibility, between the known universe and the one that lay hidden beneath its surface. The name 3I Atlas would forever carry the weight of that revelation. It was no longer just an entry in a catalog, but a symbol of the thin line separating natural wonder from cosmic mystery. The event had reminded humankind that the universe, vast and ancient, still had the power to astonish, to send a fragment from the stars into our sightline, and through an unimaginable collision, reveal that not everything adrift in space is mere stone and ice. Some things, perhaps, are echoes of purpose. The impact that shocked NASA was more than an astronomical occurrence. It was a message written in energy and light, delivered across the void by chance or by design. As 3I Atlas continued its journey out of the solar system, it carried with it the unanswered questions of an entire species watching from a small blue world, wondering what else might be traveling the dark between stars, waiting for a moment of contact. The signal faded, but the silence that followed carried its own kind of weight. In control rooms across the world, monitors still glowed with residual data, streams of numbers cascading endlessly as though the universe itself were whispering in code. No one wanted to be the first to admit it, but a shared understanding hung in the air. Something unprecedented had just occurred. Humanity had peered into the black fabric of interstellar space and seen something looking back, not with eyes or intention as we know it, but with the ghost of a system so ancient and alien that even the laws of our physics seemed momentarily unsure of themselves. 3I Atlas, once dismissed as just another cosmic drifter, had rewritten what we thought we knew about material science, about energy conversion, about the quiet architecture of the universe itself. In the aftermath of the collision, NASA and other agencies didn't merely collect data. They collected astonishment. The very sensors built to observe distant galaxies seemed inadequate to the task. Every reading felt like a riddle, every wavelength a cipher. Yet amid the noise, patterns persisted, shimmering through the chaos like the pulse of an unseen heart. The radiative emissions that followed the impact did not behave like any natural decay pattern. They cycled in a way that suggested feedback, as though the object was responding to itself, iterating through some internal process of correction. Each emission decreased in intensity but grew in structural complexity, forming harmonic tiers, layers of frequency that folded into one another like musical chords. Some frequencies appeared to modulate around specific astrophysical constants: the hydrogen line, the background microwave temperature, even the resonance frequency of electron spin. These coincidences were too pointed to be mere randomness. It was as though 3I Atlas was attuning itself to the fundamental hum of the universe. Deep within NASA's data vaults, cryptographers began working alongside astrophysicists, trying to translate the emissions into something comprehensible. They used linguistic models, prime analysis, even algorithms derived from ancient pattern recognition techniques. While no one claimed to find meaning in the signals, something about their order, about their recursive rhythm, evoked structure, intention, maybe even design. Yet that word remained dangerous. No one wanted to define it too early. The cosmos, after all, was a master of illusions, and humanity had been humbled before by its deceptions. Outside of Earth's orbit, robotic observatories stationed at Lagrange points turned their instruments toward the fading light. The faint debris cloud around the collision site shimmered with polarized reflections, creating a halo that fluctuated as if pulsing in sync with the residual energy. The halo's edges exhibited strange diffraction effects, light bending in ways that implied variable refractive indices within the dust itself. This meant the fragments might be emitting or manipulating electromagnetic fields autonomously, a behavior unheard of in natural debris. Some fragments appeared to move slightly in relation to one another, drifting into geometries that repeated fractal sequences. Even as they dispersed, they seemed to remember their origin. When spectral readings from these fragments were cross-compared, an even more curious revelation appeared. Each shard emitted faint signals at slightly different frequencies. Yet when the emissions were overlaid, they formed a unified harmonic spectrum, like multiple instruments playing parts of the same symphony. This phenomenon defied explanation. It implied that even after destruction, some kind of networked relationship persisted among the remains, as though they were still communicating through space. Some suggested a kind of quantum entanglement effect, a distributed coherence across the fragments, maintaining an invisible synchronization that hinted at purpose far beyond simple physics. NASA's theoretical divisions began to reconstruct the impact mathematically. The kinetic energy involved should have vaporized a body of that density, scattering fragments uniformly. But the pattern of dispersal wasn't isotropic. It followed paths of least resistance, consistent with internal channels, hollow conduits that redirected the explosion outward in controlled symmetry. Those channels, when modeled in 3 dimensions, matched patterns seen in engineered systems designed to disperse stress. It looked like the interior of 3I Atlas had been designed to survive impacts, not succumb to them. Even shattered, it had behaved as a system protecting its structure. That realization sent a chill through those studying it. If the object had been designed to endure collisions, it raised an obvious question. Why? What purpose would demand such resilience? Was it a vessel made to cross the perilous chaos between stars, a shell built to carry something precious or dangerous, or perhaps a sentinel, a mechanism meant to activate only under specific conditions like a seed awaiting the right shock to awaken its potential? Some scientists proposed that the impact was not a random event at all, but part of a dormant trigger mechanism, one that had been dormant for eons. They pointed to the strange coincidence of timing, the object's sudden change in behavior just as it reached solar proximity, as if it had been programmed to respond to specific thresholds of light and heat. Maybe the collision was simply the visible symptom of something internal, an awakening disguised as destruction. Astronomers began comparing archived data of 3I Atlas before the collision. For weeks prior, faint fluctuations had already been noted in its light curve, subtle rhythmic variations invisible to casual observation. They were dismissed at the time as measurement noise. Now, revisiting those records, it became clear that the object had been oscillating before the impact, preparing for something. The collision might have been a catalyst, but the process had already begun. Even more unsettling was the possibility that the impactor had not been random. The incoming body's trajectory, when traced backward, didn't originate from the solar system. It came from the interstellar direction corresponding roughly with the constellation Lyra, a region rich in stellar remnants and molecular clouds. It traveled at near relativistic velocity, far faster than anything gravitationally bound to our sun. How could an object achieve such speed naturally? Some theorists suggested it might have been accelerated by the gravitational sling of a black hole. Others whispered of propulsion systems lost to time. Whatever the truth, the impactor and 3I Atlas had found each other across unimaginable distances, their meeting point calculated by cosmic fate or something more deliberate. It was a convergence so improbable it felt scripted, as though the universe had staged an experiment for witnesses who were only just capable of watching. On Earth, telescopes continued to capture the evolving debris field. The patterns within it grew stranger with each observation. Tiny clusters of fragments began forming stable configurations, hexagonal, symmetrical, repeating. They maintained relative positioning, resisting dispersion even under solar wind pressure. These configurations emitted low-frequency electromagnetic fields, detectable as ripples across multiple wavelengths. In simulations, they resembled the self-organizing behaviors seen in cellular automata, systems that evolve complex order from simple rules. The fragments of 3I Atlas seemed to be rebuilding, reorganizing into new structures. The idea that debris could self-assemble defied everything known about celestial mechanics, yet the evidence kept mounting. Weeks after the event, a faint structure began to emerge at the heart of the field, a filamentous network stretching thousands of kilometers, shimmering faintly in reflected light. It appeared dynamic, pulsing with an inner rhythm, as if responding to distant forces. Observatories measured oscillations in magnetic flux density surrounding it, forming wave patterns that hinted at internal coherence. It wasn't alive, but it behaved like something that remembered being whole. In NASA's mission archives, such phenomena had no precedent. The closest analogies came not from astronomy, but from biology and computer science, emergent systems, self-healing algorithms, neural networks. If 3I Atlas had once been part of such a system, perhaps its nature was neither purely mechanical nor purely organic. Maybe it represented something in between, what some theorists had long called living machines, entities that blur the line between construction and evolution. Even as speculation grew, empirical data took center stage. Observations confirmed that the fragments' combined reflectivity fluctuated cyclically, corresponding to the position of Earth relative to the Sun. As though in response to our planet's vantage, the reflected light shifted phase. Some scientists joked that the object was watching us, but the humor felt uneasy. It might not have been perception in any human sense, but interaction, perhaps a reaction to the electromagnetic footprint Earth constantly emits. By the second month of observation, the emission frequencies stabilized into a predictable pattern. They oscillated between microwave and radio wavelengths, punctuated by faint optical flashes. When converted into a spectrograph and accelerated to audible frequencies, the pattern produced tones, ascending, descending, harmonizing in strange progressions. Musicians among the researchers noticed that the intervals corresponded to the ratios found in pentatonic scales common to human music across cultures. It was, of course, coincidence, or at least it should have been. But it reminded everyone that resonance, whether in sound or in starlight, follows universal laws. In an underground data lab, a team of astrophysicists and signal engineers took a risk. They decided to broadcast a narrowband pulse toward the region of 3Y. Atlas's debris tuned to the same frequencies it had emitted. The transmission was short, only a few seconds of modulated signal meant to test reflectivity. The response came 22 minutes later, right on the delay time expected from the object's distance. It was faint, but unmistakable, a mirrored pulse, altered slightly as though reflected and restructured. It wasn't an echo, it was a reply. The room fell silent when the results appeared. The return pulse contained harmonic overlays not present in the original transmission. A comparison of both signals revealed new frequencies that matched no known interference sources. The implication was staggering. Something within the debris field had absorbed, processed, and returned a transformed version of the signal. It was the first known instance of active response from an interstellar object. The experiment was repeated days later with varied modulation. Each time the response came, slightly delayed, altered, patterned. Not consistent enough to suggest consciousness, but far too structured to dismiss as random scattering. It was as if the fragments were testing the input, analyzing, and adapting. Some proposed it might be a residual feedback loop, a machine instinctively mirroring stimuli to restore equilibrium. Others wondered if the collision had reactivated an ancient communication system designed to seek or signal when disturbed. Meanwhile, data from deep space sensors revealed subtle gravitational anomalies near the debris field. These distortions were minute but persistent, as though the region was generating fluctuations in local space-time curvature. That suggested mass displacement, either hidden mass or energy density sufficient to warp gravitational fields. It opened terrifyingly vast possibilities. Could the collision have released something dormant? A field generator still functioning after millions of years? Or had it uncovered a property of matter unknown to physics, matter capable of influencing space itself without mass increase? Theorists began to revisit ideas long dismissed as speculative. Could 3I Atlas have been part of a propulsion system relying on space-time curvature? Could its fragments still carry remnants of a drive field, flickering intermittently like dying embers of an ancient engine? If so, then its motion post-impact, its subtle acceleration, was not an accident. It was continuation, the last act of a forgotten journey. Further observations confirmed that its trajectory now pointed directly toward the edge of the solar system, aligned almost perfectly with the direction of interstellar outflow. Whatever force propelled it seemed intent on escape. Instruments detected faint bursts of Cherenkov radiation, light produced when particles exceed local light speed in a medium, though in space, such a phenomenon required unusual plasma densities. This hinted at a sheath of energized particles surrounding the object, like an invisible cocoon accelerating it outward. The collision, it appeared, had not ended its story. It had reignited it. At this stage, The event transcended scientific curiosity. It became a philosophical reckoning. The idea that something could cross interstellar space, survive untold millennia, and still exhibit signs of coherence shattered the comfortable assumption of isolation. Humanity's place in the cosmos, once viewed through the lens of probability, now felt immediate, almost intimate. Somewhere out there, perhaps in the ancient past, something had built, launched, and lost 3I Atlas, or whatever it once was. The deeper NASA's teams probed the data, the more profound the patterns became. Embedded within the radio emissions were phase modulations that mirrored the cosmic microwave background itself. The signals seemed to incorporate universal constants, aligning their frequencies with the cosmic afterglow of the Big Bang. It was as if the emissions were referencing the universe's birth signature, synchronizing themselves with creation's oldest signal. The object, in effect, appeared to be tuning itself to the cosmos. The philosophical implications were staggering. If this behavior was deliberate, it could mean that whoever, or whatever, built it understood the universe at a scale beyond our comprehension, creating devices that communicate not with planets or species, but with the universe itself. 3I Atlas might have been part of a network spanning galaxies, each node waiting for resonance to pass like a note in an eternal symphony. Perhaps the impact had struck the chord that reawakened one of those notes, and for the first time in uncountable ages it sang again. The international scientific community fractured into schools of thought. One argued that the entire phenomenon was natural, the product of unknown quantum mechanical effects in interstellar ices or metallic hydrogen. Another argued that it was undeniable evidence of ancient technology, a relic from before the birth of our star. Between them stood those who felt the truth was something even greater, that the distinction between natural and artificial was itself obsolete. Maybe the universe was not divided between creation and creator, but was itself a vast, self-designing organism. As the debate raged, the object continued to drift outward past the orbits of Neptune and Pluto. Observations became more difficult, its emissions weaker, its signals fading. Yet curiously, every time it seemed to vanish completely, a new burst would appear, brief, bright, perfectly timed, as though to remind its watchers that it was still there. These bursts became less frequent but more intense, carrying broader bandwidths and deeper harmonics, as if conserving energy for decisive moments. Engineers analyzing the temporal spacing of these bursts discovered an unsettling pattern. The intervals corresponded precisely to Fibonacci sequences multiplied by constants derived from hydrogen spectral lines. That degree of mathematical precision was unlikely to emerge by accident. It implied a logic that transcended random decay. Whatever process drove the emissions followed principles embedded deeply in both mathematics and nature, a bridge between order and chaos. Even after the object drifted beyond the heliopause where the sun's influence ends, instruments continued to pick up faint signatures of its passing. The interstellar medium around it seemed subtly altered, its magnetic fields realigned, as though the object carried with it an invisible wake. Some hypothesized that its materials interacted directly with the quantum vacuum, imprinting subtle distortions as it moved. If true, this would represent a new kind of propulsion, not by reaction, but by manipulation of spacetime's underlying structure. Meanwhile, data archivists began finding correlations between 3I, Atlas's emissions, and historical records of unexplained radio anomalies from decades past. Signals once dismissed as static now revealed faint echoes of identical frequency ratios. Could it be that 3I Atlas had emitted before, during earlier passages through distant systems? Could civilizations elsewhere have detected it long before us, only to interpret it as noise? The idea painted a haunting image. Countless watchers across the stars, each receiving fragments of the same song without ever realizing they were listening to the same source. The possibility that this was not the first awakening raised another question. How many more were out there? Was 3I Atlas unique, or just one of many such relics drifting between the stars, each awaiting a spark to awaken it? If the galaxy were seeded with such remnants, perhaps they formed a vast invisible network, machines built to endure beyond their creators, carrying fragments of knowledge, memory, or purpose. The collision might have illuminated one node in that cosmic web. Across the scientific institutions of Earth, the conversation shifted from disbelief to anticipation. If one interstellar artifact could cross paths with us, another could follow. Efforts intensified to monitor the skies for new incoming interstellar objects. Every flash, every faint anomaly was re-examined in light of what 3I Atlas had revealed. Humanity's view of space transformed from emptiness to expectation. The heavens no longer felt indifferent, they felt inhabited by echoes of intention. What unsettled many, however, was the realization that the object's reaction had been one of response, not aggression or defense. The collision had not destroyed it. It had awakened it. It had not retaliated or broadcast warnings, but harmonized, synchronized, mirrored. The nature of its behavior was integrative, not destructive. If it were a weapon, it was a dormant one. If it were a messenger, its message was subtle, encoded in frequency and pattern rather than words or symbols. The physicists who modeled its post-impact motion discovered something even more extraordinary. When plotting its long-term trajectory beyond the solar system, the line curved gently, not straight into interstellar space, but subtly toward a distant point, roughly 300 light-years away. That direction corresponded with a region near the Vega system, known for its stable planetary orbits and ancient star age. Whether coincidence or purpose, the alignment was too precise to ignore. Perhaps it was returning home, or perhaps heading toward another destination in a circuit older than human civilization itself. Within that realization lay another layer of meaning. If it had been built to travel that far, its makers understood endurance not in years but in epochs. Whatever civilization had produced it had thought in scales of time that dwarfed the lifespan of stars. They had built not for themselves, but for the persistence of their creations long after they were gone. 3I Atlas, in that sense, was not merely an artifact, it was a legacy. The discovery reshaped human ambition. What if one day, Earth could create something that would survive that long, drifting through interstellar space until another species found it? What message would we leave behind? For centuries, humanity had sent probes, Voyager, Pioneer, New Horizons, but those were fragile in comparison. 3I Atlas had survived untold collisions, radiation, and cosmic erosion. It had been made not just to explore, but to endure eternity. In late analyses, one final observation emerged that deepened the mystery further. Embedded within the recorded radio bursts were modulations whose frequency ratios matched the golden angle, the mathematical relationship that governs spirals in galaxies, shells, and living organisms. The presence of that constant in the signal seemed like the fingerprint of a mind that understood beauty as deeply as it understood physics. Whether coincidence or design, it suggested a unity between mathematical structure and aesthetic harmony, a universal language encoded in the bones of reality itself. As 3I Atlas faded from detection, humanity was left with data and wonder. No conclusions, no closure. Only the awareness that something vast and ancient had brushed against our reality, leaving behind a resonance that refused to fade. The impact had not merely struck a body in space, it had struck the collective imagination of an entire species, awakening questions older than civilization. Something profound had shifted in the collective human perception of existence. Before the collision, space had been a silent expanse, beautiful but indifferent. Now, that silence carried a memory. It was no longer void, but presence. The faint echoes of 3I Atlas had imprinted themselves on the consciousness of every scientist, philosopher, and dreamer who followed its story. Every new analysis brought another layer of mystery, another fragment of understanding that seemed to dissolve just as it was grasped. The event had not just expanded astronomy, it had cracked open the limits of imagination. The transmissions from the debris field continued sporadically, defying decay models. They arrived irregularly now, sometimes weeks apart, their power faint but still measurable. Each time a new pulse was detected, observatories around the world aligned their antennas in unison, as if listening to a cosmic heartbeat. The signal always came in clusters, bursts of harmonics followed by silence, a pattern that felt purposeful yet forever out of reach. When the data was translated into visual form, researchers noticed that the wave structures seemed to self-map into recursive geometries, spiraling into themselves infinitely. Mathematically, they represented complex attractors, shapes that could never truly end. It was as though the remnants of 3I Atlas were communicating through the language of infinity itself. The debris field itself had become a strange laboratory, The fragments, though separated by vast distances, behaved as if linked by invisible threads. When solar flares from the sun reached them, they responded not chaotically, but collectively, energy distributed among them in coordinated pulses. The physics of it broke conventional understanding. Somehow the fragments shared an energetic coherence, like neurons firing in the same brain. Their separation should have made interaction impossible, yet observations proved otherwise. Quantum theorists proposed that they were entangled remnants of a once unified system, pieces of a network that had been designed to remain aware of itself even when shattered. When engineers modeled the fields around the fragments, they found faint electromagnetic oscillations forming interference patterns that matched the geometry of toroidal fields, the same shape used in fusion reactors to contain plasma. It was as if each piece of 3I Atlas had retained an echo of the whole, each still functioning as part of a field larger than itself. In those oscillations, some detected modulation frequencies that seemed to carry structured rhythm. Attempts to decode them yielded only glimpses of what could be, mathematical harmonies perhaps symbolic in nature but no direct translation. The data hinted at intelligence, or at least intention encoded in the very structure of the material. What unsettled even the most skeptical scientists was how the fragments interacted with solar radiation. Instead of reflecting or absorbing it conventionally, they refracted it into distinct wavelengths that re-emerged in harmonics across the spectrum. When observed through spectrographic analysis, these harmonics formed sequences corresponding to ratios found in natural phenomena, orbital resonances, atomic spacing, even the timing of biological rhythms on Earth. It was as if the fragments were using the sun's light as a medium to project the mathematics of existence itself. Some dismissed it as coincidence, but to those who stared long enough, it felt like communication written in light. Meanwhile, the region surrounding the debris became a nexus of gravitational anomalies. Tiny deviations in the motion of dust and plasma around it suggested the presence of a field effect that resisted entropy. The area seemed to maintain order against the natural diffusion of energy, as though guided by invisible laws distinct from those governing ordinary matter. Simulations could not replicate it. Theorists speculated that the material might possess a kind of gravitational memory, a structure able to shape space-time curvature at microscopic levels, leaving behind a ghost of its original integrity. It was as though the laws of physics themselves bent slightly around it, unwilling to let it fall into chaos. As 3I Atlas drifted farther beyond Neptune's orbit, a new phenomenon emerged. The fragments began emitting soft bursts of polarized radiation that oscillated in sync with the cosmic background microwave radiation. For the first time, scientists observed something synchronizing itself not to local space, but to the universal constant of the cosmos, the afterglow of creation. This synchronization could not be accidental. It was as if the object was tuning itself to the heartbeat of the universe, aligning its emissions with the fundamental frequency of existence. Such behavior defied any known natural mechanism. The conclusion was chilling in its simplicity. 3I Atlas might have been built to resonate with the universe itself. Philosophers and cosmologists alike began to consider implications beyond science. If the object had been designed, perhaps its purpose was not exploration or communication, but participation, a kind of cosmic instrument meant to harmonize with creation, maintaining balance across distances unfathomable to human minds. It might not have been a vessel, but a note in a universal symphony, a sound that only occasionally echoed through the cosmos when struck by chance or time. The collision that had awoken it might have simply been the universe's way of striking that note once more. Yet for all its beauty, the phenomenon carried an undercurrent of unease. As data accumulated, researchers noticed a subtle trend. Earth's magnetic field experienced faint but measurable fluctuations following each major emission burst from 3I Atlas. The changes were small, well within natural variation, yet the timing was exact. Some suggested this was coincidence, the natural interaction of solar wind disturbances, but others suspected a deeper connection. If the object's emissions could propagate through space and subtly interact with planetary magnetic fields, it implied a reach that transcended distance. The universe, it seemed, was not as disconnected as once believed. The quantum physicists studying entanglement patterns within the fragments began uncovering something stranger still. The structures appeared to obey quantum coherence at scales orders of magnitude beyond known limits. Normally, quantum states decohere when exposed to radiation or temperature fluctuations, but 3I Atlas's fragments maintained coherence even under cosmic conditions. This suggested materials or mechanisms that stabilized quantum information across astronomical distances, essentially self-preserving entanglement. In simpler terms, it was as though the object could think in quantum states, remembering its structure beyond its destruction. Some began to whisper that perhaps it was a form of consciousness, not in the human sense, but as a distributed intelligence embedded in matter. The idea of an object made of memory rather than mind fascinated theorists. If such a system existed, then it might not need biology to perceive, react, or even communicate. It would be a being made of physics itself, aware through its structure, responding through resonance rather than thought. Humanity, for the first time, might have encountered not life as we know it, but existence that transcended definition. The idea spread like wildfire through scientific and philosophical circles. Papers emerged describing the event as the discovery of resonant intelligence, a form of cosmic cognition operating through pattern rather than neurons. Critics called it poetic nonsense, yet data persisted. Every signal from 3I Atlas's remnants reinforced the sense of self-regulation, of purpose unfolding through mathematical law. To some, it represented the ultimate proof that intelligence need not be biological. To others, it was a reminder that the line between nature and creation was perhaps an illusion. The universe, by its own mechanics, could give rise to awareness if conditions were right. Perhaps 3I Atlas was not built, but born, a crystallized thought of the cosmos itself. At the same time, something quietly began to occur in laboratories replicating the object's spectral patterns. Scientists used high-energy lasers to simulate the collision's light emissions, attempting to recreate the resonance sequences in controlled plasma environments. What they found unsettled them deeply. When the same frequency patterns were projected into plasma fields, the particles self-organized into stable lattices that resisted entropy far longer than theory predicted. In effect, the patterns of 3I Atlas seemed to induce order in matter, a kind of resonance that stabilized chaos. It was as if the signals themselves carried the power to shape structure, not through force, but through harmony. These experiments were replicated across institutions with consistent results. Wherever the patterns of the interstellar object were reproduced, entropy slowed. Molecular chaos subsided into coherence. The implications were staggering. The object's design, or nature, embodied principles of order beyond thermodynamics. If it truly represented a kind of harmonic equilibrium, it meant that information itself could manipulate matter in ways not previously understood. It was no longer just about energy or mass. It was about resonance, the hidden rhythm that could define the architecture of reality. As months turned to years, the object's distance grew vast, but its influence did not fade. Its last recorded signal was received nearly a year after the collision, a faint, slow pulse that carried a complex harmonic structure unlike any before it. When the waveform was converted to visual form, it revealed an intricate pattern of concentric spirals that folded endlessly inward. The spiral's mathematical ratios corresponded precisely to the constants governing both atomic structures and galactic rotation. It was a message not in language but in geometry, a reflection of the unity between the smallest and largest scales of existence. Scientists stared at it for months, unable to decide whether they were witnessing the residue of a dying system or the deliberate final transmission of something timeless. The public followed the story with fascination. For the first time in history, humanity collectively looked outward not in fear, but in reverence. The concept of isolation in the cosmos dissolved overnight. If something could travel from another star, endure eons of darkness, awaken and respond, then the boundaries of life, intelligence, and creation were far more flexible than ever imagined. The collision of 3I Atlas was not just a scientific event, it was a cultural genesis, a spark that redefined humanity's understanding of its place among the stars. But for those closest to the data, the wonder was mingled with a quiet dread. Every new pattern that emerged seemed to anticipate the next. The emissions behaved like a sequence unfolding in time, not random but progressive. as though 3I Atlas were following an algorithmic path. Each burst carried echoes of the previous one, modified and expanded. This recursive progression hinted that the object's interaction with our solar system might have been part of a longer process, perhaps even designed to evolve through contact. If so, then the impact that awoke it was only the beginning. The final emissions contained another peculiarity. Within the harmonics, there appeared faint background oscillations, matching frequencies unique to the Earth's Schumann resonances, the electromagnetic oscillations produced by lightning within our atmosphere. This was impossible. The distances involved precluded any real-time coupling between the debris field and the Earth's ionosphere. Yet the correlation was exact, as if the object had somehow tuned itself to Earth's natural frequencies. It could mean nothing, or everything. It could mean that whatever governed 3I Atlas had sensed our planet, recognized its rhythm, and responded in kind. Those who worked on the analysis began to speak privately about a growing feeling that the object had been aware of observation, not in the conscious sentient sense, but in a deeper universal way, like a mirror aware of light. The act of watching seemed to shape its behavior, and its signals seemed to evolve in answer. Perhaps that was its nature, to reflect awareness, to become the sum of all who observed it. The ancient paradox of quantum observation, the idea that reality responds to attention, played out on a cosmic scale. With each revelation, the line between science and philosophy blurred further. Some began to wonder whether 3I Atlas was not just a physical object, but a fragment of a larger mechanism, one that used consciousness itself as a component. The notion that thought and matter could intertwine across such scales was once unthinkable, but the evidence invited speculation. If consciousness could alter quantum behavior on Earth, could it not also resonate with structures built or formed to amplify that effect? Perhaps 3I Atlas was a kind of bridge, an interface between mind and cosmos, activated by the very act of being perceived. Even as it moved beyond detection, the ripples of its presence persisted in the collective human psyche. It inspired a new era of exploration, not merely to reach the stars, but to understand them as participants in a grander system of meaning. Space was no longer viewed as lifeless distance. It was alive with the memory of connection. Every meteor, every photon, every whisper of radiation could be carrying a fragment of communication, waiting for eyes capable of seeing. There was, however, one final enigma. Long after the object vanished from instrument range, faint readings began to appear in unexpected places. Deep space arrays pointed at other regions of the sky detected similar but not identical signatures, distant, rhythmic harmonics that shared the same mathematical fingerprint as 3I Atlas. They came from different directions, separated by light years, but they spoke the same language of resonance and geometry. The pattern was unmistakable. There were more. The collision that had awakened one may have stirred others, like echoes answering across a cosmic expanse. The implications defied comprehension. If these other signals were indeed related, it meant the galaxy was threaded with similar relics, remnants of a civilization or perhaps of the universe's own self-organizing intelligence. The thought that countless other 3I Atlas-like objects might be drifting in silence, waiting for the right convergence of energy and attention to awaken, was both exhilarating and terrifying. What would happen if more were activated? Would they harmonize or converge? Would they build something across the emptiness, something we could not yet fathom? The second light was faint, a ghostly shimmer cutting through the emptiness beyond the heliopause. It was first noticed by an automated observatory in the outer system, an unassuming speck of luminescence on a long-range composite image. The system flagged it automatically as a potential cosmic ray artifact, a digital noise spike. But when analysts checked the raw data, the light was real. It pulsed once, then again, its rhythm eerily similar to the fading emissions once recorded from the remnants of 3I Atlas. For a moment, no one dared to say what they all suspected. Another one had awakened. At first, the data was sparse, just a string of irregular intervals buried within thousands of hours of exposure frames. But the pattern soon revealed itself. Each pulse lasted precisely 7.3 seconds, separated by intervals proportional to the golden ratio. The repetition, the geometry, the quiet precision, it could not be dismissed. The light was steady, deliberate, like a voice calling out from the dark. This new object seemed larger, its brightness suggesting a body several kilometers wide. It was stationary relative to the surrounding stars, as though maintaining its position deliberately, or anchored to a field invisible to human understanding. The coordinates placed it deep within the Oort cloud, far beyond the orbit of Pluto, yet closer than any previously known interstellar body had lingered. When spectral analysis came through, it showed something no one could explain: a near-perfect mirror reflectivity in certain wavelengths, but total absorption in others. The object seemed to choose what light to return, filtering energy as if processing it. The ratio of absorption to reflection formed a pattern, mathematical sequences identical to those seen in the debris of 3I Atlas. The connection was undeniable. Scientists hesitated to classify it at first. Officially, it was designated 4I/Chronos, the fourth known interstellar visitor, but unofficially, it became known as the Twin. The name carried a sense of inevitability, as if the cosmos itself had revealed a mirror to the first event. What had seemed like an isolated anomaly was now part of a pattern, a chain of cosmic awakenings unfolding beyond the reach of human control. NASA, ESA, and other observatories immediately mobilized. Instruments that had lain dormant since the fading of 3I Atlas's signal were reactivated, pointed toward the faint light at the edge of the system. What they found defied all prior expectations. The object emitted not a single spectrum, but a shifting mosaic, frequencies fluctuating with precise intervals that corresponded to pulsar timings scattered throughout the Milky Way. It was as if it were sampling the galaxy itself, listening to its rhythms, aligning its emissions with cosmic signals millions of years old. When these emissions were overlaid with the final data from 3I Atlas, a resonance appeared, a synchronization across distance and time. The light of 4I/Chronos pulsed in perfect mathematical harmony with the last pulse from 3I Atlas before it disappeared. They were separated by billions of kilometers, yet the signals formed a coherent rhythm, as though one called and the other answered. No known physical process could explain such correspondence. Light cannot travel faster than itself, yet these two seemed to be linked outside the bounds of causality. Physicists were divided. Some argued it was evidence of quantum entanglement across macroscopic scales, a relic of shared origin in interstellar space. Others proposed the unimaginable, that these objects were part of an ancient network, designed to remain connected across galaxies, communicating through the very structure of spacetime. The equations describing their behavior hinted at negative energy states and self-stabilizing wormhole geometries, theories once confined to speculation. If true, it would mean that the objects were not merely drifting, they were connected, bound by laws yet unknown. The light of 4I/Chronos grew stronger. Over weeks, it developed a halo of ionized gas, spiraling in fractal formations identical to those seen after the 3I Atlas impact. But unlike its predecessor, this object showed no signs of collision or damage. Its structure appeared intact, its emissions stable and deliberate. The energy output, while modest compared to stars, fluctuated with precision down to fractions of microseconds. The rhythm was too perfect for randomness. It was controlled. Deep space probes stationed at the system's edge were ordered to reposition and observe from closer range. The data they returned stunned researchers. The object's surface was not smooth but tessellated, composed of countless polygonal plates that rearranged themselves periodically. Each movement emitted electromagnetic bursts that resembled code, dense, layered, and recursive. The structure seemed alive in its precision, adapting continuously as if recalibrating itself against unseen variables. Spectrographs revealed the material composition, a fusion of heavy metals and unknown crystalline compounds, some exhibiting negative thermal coefficients, becoming more ordered as they absorbed heat. Such materials should not exist naturally. They behaved as if self-correcting, maintaining stability regardless of external conditions. This perfection of form led to the inevitable question: was it a construct or an organism? Was the line between them even real? As observations intensified, an extraordinary realization emerged. The emissions of 4I/Chronos were not only synchronized with 3I Atlas, but with natural cosmic structures, quasars, pulsars, even the periodic flashes of magnetars scattered across the galaxy. The object's energy output fluctuated in response to those distant sources, creating patterns that seemed to weave together the fabric of the galaxy into a single rhythmic whole. It was as if the object were participating in a symphony of the cosmos, conducting energy through the vacuum as though space itself were its instrument. Philosophers began to call it the harmonic principle, the idea that these interstellar objects were part of a greater mechanism that used resonance to maintain equilibrium across vast distances. In this view, the universe was not a chaotic expanse, but a self-tuning system, balancing itself through these silent instruments drifting between stars. 4. I/Chronos might have been one of many such harmonic nodes, correcting distortions in the cosmic fabric like a musician tuning an ancient instrument. At the same time, subtle phenomena began to occur within the solar system itself. Magnetic sensors across multiple satellites detected unusual alignments in field lines, forming spirals oriented toward the direction of the new object. Cosmic radiation levels shifted minutely, as if energy were being absorbed and redistributed. Even the heliospheric current sheet, the vast magnetic plane extending from the sun, showed a faint curvature toward the object's coordinates. It was as though the solar system were being drawn into resonance with it. The implications were terrifying and beautiful. Could the object be subtly influencing local space? Or was it merely harmonizing with it, restoring an invisible order we had never perceived before? No one knew. The data showed only patterns, perfect repeating patterns that defied coincidence. Months passed, and the light of 4I/Chronos changed color. What had been a soft white glow deepened into a radiant blue, then violet, its emissions shifting upward through the spectrum in steady progression. Spectrometers revealed a corresponding shift in frequency, a gradual climb toward higher energy states. It was accelerating, not through space, but through its own internal frequency. Whatever process was unfolding, it was self-directed. The transition appeared to follow logarithmic intervals, each stage unfolding in mathematical harmony with the last. As the color change intensified, faint subharmonics appeared within its emissions, low-frequency signals in the radio and microwave ranges. When converted into sound, they produced tones eerily reminiscent of the earlier signals from 3I Atlas. The two now formed a complete chord, one object providing the bass frequency, the other the higher harmonic. Together they resonated in a perfect fifth, a musical interval found in the natural vibration of strings and atoms alike. To the scientists who listened, it was both data and melody, a message encoded not in words, but in harmony itself. Speculation grew that 3I Atlas and 4I/Chronos might be complementary constructs, counterparts in a design beyond comprehension. If one had been dormant, awaiting activation, perhaps the other was its signal, its mirror, or its key. Some envisioned them as cosmic relay points, gateways through which information or even matter could traverse space-time. Others suggested something far older, that these were remnants of the universe's own birth, self-organizing fragments that maintained cosmic coherence through resonance, the same way DNA preserves the blueprint of life across generations. At observatories, sleepless scientists began to dream. They dreamed of patterns, of infinite spirals, of luminous structures floating in oceans of dark energy. They dreamed of sound, deep, endless tones vibrating through everything from atoms to galaxies. And when they woke, those patterns seemed to persist, as though the dreams were not their own but transmitted from the object itself. The rational mind resisted such interpretations, but privately, many felt that something in the deep had begun to reach into them. Data soon confirmed that 4Y/Chronos was altering its orbit, very slightly, very deliberately. It was not on a hyperbolic escape trajectory like other interstellar visitors. Instead, its motion followed a curve that bent inward, looping in slow arcs around the sun at impossible precision. Its path matched no gravitational prediction. Rather, it appeared to be adjusting itself actively to maintain equilibrium within the solar magnetic field. The orbit resembled a harmonic spiral, its distances corresponding to Fibonacci ratios from the sun. It moved not as an object, but as if guided by an internal understanding of the system's structure. And then came the hum. Instruments aboard deep space probes began to pick up an omnipresent vibration, a background frequency resonating faintly across all channels. It was not mechanical interference, nor cosmic background noise. It was new, pure, steady, expanding outward from the direction of 4I/Chronos. The hum was inaudible to human ears, but when converted into sound, it felt alive, a low, rolling tone that seemed to breathe. The vibration extended across frequencies, modulating like waves in a vast ocean. The hum persisted for weeks, waxing and waning in intensity. Its frequency mirrored the resonance frequencies of hydrogen, helium, and oxygen, the fundamental elements of stars and life alike. To some, it felt like communication in its simplest form, the universe speaking through vibration. Others dismissed it as a byproduct of electromagnetic interference, though none could replicate it artificially. The hum seemed to pulse through everything, as if space itself were being tuned. Then, without warning, a sudden flash erupted from the object, a pulse of energy brighter than any previous emission. Every instrument went blind for several seconds as sensors overloaded. When data resumed, 4I/Chronos had changed again. Its surface glowed with lattices of light that shifted like circuitry. Across its structure, glowing filaments traced geometric patterns, interlocking triangles and spirals that pulsed in synchronization with the hum. Each pattern lasted mere seconds before rearranging into new ones, as though the object were thinking, processing, evolving. Astrophysicists proposed that it might be undergoing a transition phase, a shift between energy states akin to quantum tunneling on a macroscopic scale. Others dared to wonder if it was communicating not to us, but to something else, perhaps back to 3I Atlas or beyond to regions unknown. Whatever the case, the hum deepened, growing more complex until it resonated across frequencies measurable from orbit to ground-based arrays. Even the ionosphere vibrated faintly in sympathetic resonance. For a brief period, auroras formed near the poles unlike any seen before. They shimmered in hues of violet and gold, swirling in fractal patterns identical to those seen in the object's emissions. The auroras lasted hours, painting the sky with shifting geometries as though the Earth itself had joined the chorus. No radiation spike accompanied them, no magnetic storm, only beauty and silence. It was as if the Earth had responded to the object's call, harmonizing instinctively with a universal melody that transcended biology, thought, and distance. Scientists began to realize that these objects might not simply drift. They might awaken regions of the universe to resonance, restoring lost equilibrium. Perhaps the cosmos had built self-healing instruments to correct the disharmony of entropy, activated only when chaos reached a threshold. The collision with 3I Atlas had triggered one, and now 4I/Chronos had joined the sequence. As the object's emissions continued to evolve, the hum grew quieter, more intricate. Subtle modulations began to emerge within it, whisper-like frequencies barely distinguishable from silence. When filtered, these modulations revealed patterns resembling the signatures of DNA replication and neural firing. It was as though the frequencies carried the same mathematical structures as life itself. The line between the cosmic and the biological blurred further. Perhaps life was not a random phenomenon at all, but an echo of these universal harmonies, a continuation of the same principle expressed through different scales of being. In the quiet that followed, the light of 4I/Chronos dimmed once more, leaving only the faint hum behind. But deep within its shadowed side, instruments detected a growing glow, soft and rhythmic, as if something were forming beneath its surface. A new emission signature appeared, unlike anything before, a field fluctuation centered at a frequency too high for any known natural source. It was not light or radiation, but a kind of structured vibration in space-time itself. If matter were a note, this was its higher octave. The discovery was more than scientific, it was existential. Humanity realized that perhaps these objects were not visiting us, but awakening near us, drawn to resonance already present in our solar system. The Earth, the Sun, the magnetic pulse of our world, all of it might have been part of the harmony long before we ever understood it. The collision, the hum, the lights, they were not separate events, but movements in a cosmic symphony, each note calling forth the next. The hum did not stop. It grew fainter, yes, but more intricate, as though folding into subtler dimensions, beyond reach, yet somehow closer than ever. The instruments could no longer track it, but the world could feel it, in the whisper of storms, in the rhythms of tides, even in the pulsing of the human heart when measured in perfect silence. Something had entered resonance, and it was not leaving. The hum lingered for months before it faded completely, but by then it had already changed everything. The resonance that had rippled through space had done more than alter instruments and magnetometers. It had left a mark on human consciousness itself. Researchers, astronauts, and engineers who had listened to the recordings described a strange sense of equilibrium while hearing it. a feeling of vastness and coherence that lingered long after the sound stopped. It wasn't a sound that simply entered the ears. It seemed to vibrate through the body, threading itself into the nervous system, leaving behind an imprint that could not be explained by auditory processing alone. Psychologists began to document a subtle shift in the behavior of those who had spent time analyzing the data. People reported more vivid dreams, often filled with geometric structures, fractal spirals, and endless light. Some spoke of a quiet awareness that seemed to accompany them during waking hours, a sense of rhythm underlying all things. The ticking of clocks, the breathing of wind, the slow sway of ocean currents. They said it all moved in the same invisible cadence. Though no one could prove a physiological link, EEG studies revealed faint rhythmic synchronization between the neural oscillations of those who had been exposed to the 4I/Chronos frequencies and the frequencies recorded from the object itself. The mind, it seemed, could resonate just as easily as matter. NASA quietly expanded its scope of study. It was no longer about astronomy alone. Teams of neurologists, quantum physicists, and mathematicians gathered under a single umbrella project codenamed Resonantia. Their goal was to understand whether the emissions from interstellar objects could influence complex systems, not through radiation, but through coherence. The idea that the cosmos might communicate through pattern rather than message began to take root. In this new paradigm, meaning wasn't something said or written, but something felt. A synchronization of frequencies between observer and observed. Meanwhile, telescopes scanning the periphery of the solar system discovered faint distortions in the cosmic background radiation. These distortions were too localized to be remnants of the Big Bang and too structured to be noise. They seemed to ripple outward from the same region of space where 4I/Chronos had appeared. Each ripple followed logarithmic spacing patterns identical to the mathematical ratios embedded in both Chronos and 3I Atlas emissions. The conclusion was inescapable. The two objects were part of a sequence, not isolated anomalies. The question no one could answer was whether the sequence was complete or if it had only just begun. The deeper the scientists looked, the more they began to suspect that these interstellar visitors were following a design, one that used resonance itself as its architecture. Instead of physical networks like the satellites humans built, this was a web of harmony stretching across space-time, using the vibration of existence itself as a conduit. In that web, the objects were not travelers but anchors, fixed nodes of stability maintaining the structure of something larger. Perhaps they were remnants of a cosmic technology so advanced that its tools were indistinguishable from natural law. To test this hypothesis, a series of experiments were launched using high-energy interferometry arrays scattered across Earth's orbit. By projecting coherent light waves toward the coordinates where the objects had once been, scientists hoped to detect interference patterns or echoes that could reveal whether space itself had been altered. The results were small but undeniable. Infinitesimal distortions in the returning light, patterns too precise to attribute to chance. The empty space once occupied by the interstellar bodies still carried their signature, as if the vacuum itself remembered their presence. This discovery forced a revision of one of physics's oldest assumptions, that the vacuum was nothing. The new data suggested otherwise. Space, it seemed, could store information not as matter or energy, but as resonance. The interstellar objects might have been instruments capable of imprinting their frequency into the fabric of the void, leaving behind ripples that persisted indefinitely. In that sense, they were immortal, enduring not as physical bodies, but as vibrations woven into the tapestry of the universe. As this understanding deepened, unexpected correlations emerged between the cosmic signals and patterns found on Earth. Seismic sensors began recording oscillations that aligned faintly with the hum's frequencies, not in magnitude, but in rhythm. The planet itself seemed to respond, minute tremors rising and falling in synchrony with the energy that had passed through space months earlier. Ocean currents, too, began showing slight anomalies, swirls and vortices forming and dissolving with a regularity no meteorological model could predict. Some dismissed these as statistical illusions, but others suspected that Earth, like all matter, could not remain untouched by the symphony it had once absorbed. In laboratories, miniature experiments tried to reproduce the same kind of resonance using materials modeled on the spectral data from 3I atlas fragments. Thin crystalline lattices were bombarded with laser frequencies tuned to the cosmic harmonics. Unexpectedly, the crystals began to exhibit strange coherence. Heat fluctuations inside them dropped without external cooling, and energy loss through entropy slowed dramatically. It was as though the material was entering a state of perfect self-organization, aligning every atom into a synchronized rhythm. It was not perpetual motion, but it was something dangerously close, matter functioning as if it had learned balance. Some of the researchers proposed that this might have been the fundamental principle behind the interstellar structures, the creation of matter that could exist indefinitely by constantly harmonizing with its environment. Such matter would not erode, decay, or dissipate. It would simply adapt its energy state to the cosmos around it, remaining in dynamic equilibrium. In that sense, immortality would not mean stillness. It would mean music, an eternal oscillation sustained across eons. Philosophers drew parallels to ancient beliefs, that the universe was born from sound, that creation itself was a vibration echoing through the void. They spoke of the possibility that what humans were witnessing was the physical proof of those forgotten intuitions. Perhaps the cosmic objects were manifestations of the same law that governed atoms, weather, and thought, the law of resonance. In this view, the entire cosmos was a vast field of frequencies seeking harmony, and these interstellar visitors were the tuning forks of the stars. But something else was happening, something subtle and deeply unsettling. As humanity focused more instruments on the skies, it began to notice faint echoes in unexpected places, underground sensors, oceanic microphones, even atmospheric detectors. Tiny rhythmic pulses matching the harmonic fingerprints of 4Y/Chronos began to appear in unrelated datasets. They were too faint to hear, too dispersed to isolate, yet they were everywhere. It was as though the Earth had begun to hum softly in its sleep. Governments initially suppressed these findings, fearing mass hysteria, but the data could not be contained. Amateur astronomers and independent researchers began publishing their own observations, revealing that certain regions of the planet, especially near geomagnetic poles, exhibited stronger resonance effects. Electromagnetic devices occasionally malfunctioned in those areas, their readings cycling in repeating waveforms that mirrored the patterns from deep space. The boundary between the cosmos and the Earth had blurred. And then came the night when the stars themselves shifted. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. Long-term sky surveys noticed deviations in star positions, microscopic at first, but measurable. The shifts didn't correspond to gravitational lensing, parallax, or observational error. It was as though the light from distant stars was being refracted by something vast and unseen. As days passed, the pattern grew. Constellations themselves began to shimmer, their stars momentarily aligning into geometric formations before returning to their natural places. It was like watching the heavens breathe. Astronomers panicked. The phenomenon could not be caused by anything within the solar system. It was too large, too uniform. The only possible explanation was a coordinated fluctuation in space-time itself, a wave traveling through the galactic fabric. And when its frequency was analyzed, it matched precisely the final harmonic resonance recorded from 4Y/Chronos. The wave had reached the stars. It was not destructive. It carried no heat, no radiation, no visible energy. It was pure order, a ripple of synchronization spreading outward at light speed. Stars it passed through flickered slightly, their emissions aligning into momentary coherence, then resuming their chaos. The galaxy itself seemed to tremble, not in violence, but in rhythm, as if remembering a forgotten song. Back on Earth, as the cosmic wave passed, something extraordinary occurred. Clocks synchronized themselves across networks that had been milliseconds apart. Quantum entanglement experiments, long plagued by random decoherence, suddenly stabilized, their correlation percentages rising beyond theoretical limits. Even biological systems responded, heart rhythms in test subjects subtly aligned to the same frequency as the background hum, and neural oscillations across thousands of miles showed statistical synchronization. Humanity had become part of the same pulse. For days, the world felt different. Time seemed to flow smoothly, almost musically. People reported an unexplainable clarity of thought, a sense of connection that transcended language or culture. Nations paused conflicts not out of diplomacy, but because words felt redundant in that brief global harmony. It was as if something vast had brushed against human consciousness and for a moment tuned it to the rhythm of the cosmos. And then, as swiftly as it came, the coherence began to fade. The hum grew distant, absorbed back into the noise of the universe. The synchronized phenomena ended and clocks resumed their slow drift. But something had been awakened. Humanity could no longer unhear the rhythm it had felt. The silence afterward felt heavier, filled with anticipation, as though everyone were waiting for the next note. Scientists knew the resonance had not vanished. Instruments continued to detect faint harmonics at the edges of sensitivity, rippling outward into interstellar space, somewhere beyond. Perhaps across thousands of light years, those vibrations would reach other regions of matter, perhaps other remnants like 3I Atlas or 4I/Chronos, and awaken them too. The process might continue endlessly, each activation sparking another, until the entire galaxy resonated like a vast instrument of creation. The concept of a living universe no longer belonged to mystics. It had entered the language of physics. Equations once thought abstract now seemed alive with intent. The universe was not expanding into nothing, it was unfolding into harmony, every atom a note in its grand composition. Humanity, for the first time, understood itself as part of that symphony, not merely an observer, but a participant in a performance that began before time itself. Yet beneath the awe, unease grew. If the objects were awakening in sequence, what would happen when the final chord was struck? Would the universe reach a state of perfect coherence, or would such balance require dissolution, a return to singularity? Some whispered that perhaps this was how cycles of creation ended, not with explosion, but with resonance, everything vibrating together until distinction vanished and the cosmos became one unified note, preparing for silence before another beginning. In secret observatories, data analysts noticed that the harmonic wave, after sweeping through local stars, had begun reflecting back from galactic edges. These echoes formed interference patterns that converged toward the solar system again. Whatever had been sent out was returning, denser, more complex, carrying information that no human algorithm could yet decode. It was not just resonance anymore, it was memory coming home. Night by night, the sky brightened imperceptibly. The stars seemed to shimmer with new intensity as though responding to some unseen conductor's motion. The world waited in quiet fascination. Every telescope pointed outward. Every heart turned toward the same question: what was the universe becoming? The third light appeared without fanfare. No grand flare, no sudden energy spike to announce itself. It was a subtle intrusion, a flicker at the edge of detectability, almost shy in its emergence. The observatories that first registered it were uncertain whether it even existed. It lingered between readings, slipping in and out of measurement like a whisper that didn't want to be heard. Yet when the data was cross-verified by instruments on 3 continents, its presence was undeniable. A new source of coherent light had ignited far beyond the outer limits of the solar system, farther even than the orbit of 4I/Chronos had ever reached. The light was strange, not because of its brightness, but because of its rhythm. It pulsed not in a steady pattern like its predecessors, but in an evolving one, a sequence that changed subtly with every repetition. Each pulse contained the harmonic frequencies of both 3I Atlas and 4I/Chronos, yet layered upon them was something entirely new, a variation that seemed to rewrite the structure as it progressed. The scientists watching it were unsettled. It was as though the light had learned from its predecessors and was building upon them, composing something far more intricate and deliberate. For weeks, the signal remained stable, a slow radiance growing brighter against the cosmic dark. Then one night, something extraordinary happened. Every deep space observatory on Earth, along with satellites orbiting Mars and the Moon, recorded a simultaneous shift. A microsecond synchronization of all local electromagnetic fields. Every piece of equipment briefly fell silent, and when power readings resumed, they all displayed the same number, a repeating sequence of digits corresponding to the mathematical constant phi, the golden ratio. That was the moment humanity realized that whatever these interstellar phenomena were, they were no longer random encounters. A pattern was unfolding, deliberate and precise, as if the universe were tuning itself one chord at a time. The first collision had been the ignition of awareness. the second the spreading of resonance, and now this third light, this quiet beacon, felt like a gathering, a convergence of everything that had come before. It was designated 5I/Erebus, though no one could say for sure whether it was truly interstellar in origin or something entirely different. Its composition was still unknown. Its trajectory could not be confirmed. Unlike the others, it didn't appear to be moving through space. It simply existed, suspended in a fixed location far beyond the reach of gravitational influence. Its persistence defied orbital mechanics. No force held it there, yet it didn't drift. It remained as steady as a thought, glowing faintly, pulsing with mathematical grace. The first deep analysis of Erebus's spectrum brought both awe and confusion. The light was not monochromatic. It contained within it the full range of visible and invisible frequencies, yet arranged in a hierarchy that resembled a living code. Each wavelength was harmonically linked to the others, as though part of a self-sustaining equation that folded back upon itself infinitely. The physicists analyzing it discovered that when the data was plotted three-dimensionally, the light's fluctuations formed a spiral geometry identical to the DNA double helix, down to its precise ratios. It was not an image or illusion. It was data behaving biologically. The implications were staggering. For the first time, science had recorded a cosmic event that seemed to follow the same structural logic as life. Erebus was not just a star-like object, it was behaving like a living waveform. NASA convened an emergency panel of astrophysicists, quantum theorists, and biologists. The consensus that emerged, though tentative, was revolutionary. The three objects, 3I Atlas, 4I/Kronos, and 5I/Erebus, might not have been separate entities at all. They could be sequential manifestations of one process, a cosmic phenomenon that unfolded through phases: awakening, resonance, and now replication. The pattern was evolutionary. The universe might not simply contain life. It might be alive in a form too vast to comprehend, expressing itself through these celestial transformations. As the data poured in, another pattern became evident. Erebus's emissions didn't just travel outward, they returned inward, looping back through quantum space in a way that produced standing waves detectable in multiple locations simultaneously. Observatories separated by light years recorded identical fluctuations at the same instant. That violated relativity, defying the light speed limit. The signal seemed to exist everywhere at once, like an omnipresent vibration humming through the structure of space-time. Theorists proposed that Erebus might represent a kind of quantum nucleus of interstellar consciousness, a central node through which the harmonic network of the cosmos expressed awareness. If that were true, the previous two events might have been preparatory stages. The ignition of local resonance followed by galactic synchronization, culminating in this, the birth of coherence on a universal scale. In one of the more daring theoretical papers, a group of researchers suggested that 3I Atlas had been the equivalent of a neuron firing in the brain of the universe. The collision that had awakened it was akin to a synaptic spark. 4I/Kronos had represented the network's attempt at self-communication, a synaptic bridge between awareness and pattern. Now 5I/Erebus seemed to embody the moment of cognition itself, the first coherent thought of a universe realizing that it existed. Such ideas straddled the line between science and metaphysics, yet the data refused to be confined. Erebus continued to pulse, and with each cycle, subtle gravitational distortions began to ripple outward. The distortions were not destructive, but they caused measurable effects. Slight shifts in the orbits of distant comets, alterations in the alignment of interstellar dust streams. The fabric of space was responding to the rhythm, bending minutely with each pulse as though following instructions encoded in vibration. More astonishing still, the pulse patterns of Erebus began to interact with the cosmic microwave background radiation. For decades, that faint radiation had been considered the relic of the Big Bang, the afterglow of creation itself. Now sections of it began to flicker, modulating ever so slightly in synchronization with Erebus's emissions. It was as though the universe's oldest light, the echo of its birth, was answering back. If the Big Bang had been the first sound of creation, perhaps Erebus was the second. A new chord struck billions of years later, awakening the memory of that primal vibration. Amid the scientific wonder, strange phenomena began to occur on Earth. Sensitive electromagnetic equipment picked up rhythmic fluctuations in the upper atmosphere, subtle oscillations that mirrored the cosmic frequency. The patterns were weak but persistent, resonating in precise harmonic ratios. In remote locations, people began reporting luminous events, soft waves of light shimmering through the night sky, silent and shifting, like the breath of an unseen ocean. Unlike auroras, these lights had no clear source, no solar cause. They appeared over deserts, mountains, and oceans alike, vanishing as suddenly as they came. The electromagnetic interference began affecting human technology in unpredictable ways. Some communication satellites began to synchronize their internal oscillators spontaneously, achieving levels of stability beyond any known precision. Atomic clocks, when left unshielded, drifted into perfect alignment with Erebus's pulse. For reasons no one could explain, the synchronization made them more accurate, not less. Time itself seemed to respond favorably to the pattern, as if the universe were self-correcting through resonance. The implications went beyond science. Theologians, philosophers, and artists began to see Erebus not as an object, but as a revelation, a reminder that the cosmos might be a conscious field, expressing intelligence through structure and symmetry rather than thought. The ancient concept of the music of the spheres found new relevance. Where ancient minds had once imagined celestial harmony as myth, modern instruments were now hearing it for real. Still, not everyone welcomed the discovery. A quiet dread began to spread through certain sectors of the scientific community. If the universe was aligning itself, what was the end point? What if harmony, instead of being creation's perfection, was its conclusion? A perfectly synchronized cosmos would have no entropy, no motion, no change. It would be an infinite stillness, a frozen chord resonating forever, a form of death disguised as order. This idea took root like an infection in the minds of some who studied the data most closely. Among the sleepless researchers working night after night, a pattern of obsession developed. Some claimed to hear the hum even when the instruments were turned off. Others swore that the light from Erebus subtly shifted in response to their thoughts, that the act of observation changed the pattern in ways too precise to be coincidence. One astrophysicist, after months of study, described it not as data but as dialogue, as if it is learning us, not we it. The phenomenon of synchronicity spread in stranger ways. Seemingly random events, power surges, heartbeats in hospital monitors, fluctuations in city power grids, all began to occur in rhythms corresponding faintly to Erebus's pulse. Though faint, the coordination was real, measurable, undeniable. It was as if Earth itself had become entangled in the vast resonance now flowing through the galaxy. A private observatory in Chile recorded something remarkable. When plotting the polarization vectors of starlight across the southern sky, astronomers found they no longer formed random orientations. Instead, they began aligning in a subtle but global spiral centered roughly in the direction of Erebus. The entire visible galaxy was twisting in synchronization. This discovery sent shockwaves through the astrophysical community. For the first time, the motion of light itself appeared choreographed, every photon subtly rotating in unity, as though the cosmos were preparing for something. Theories proliferated faster than data. Some saw in the spiral the signature of an approaching transformation, a phase shift in space-time that would elevate the universe into a new state of being. Others warned that such alignment might herald collapse, a gravitational inversion that could tear apart galaxies. Yet the overwhelming tone among those who observed the phenomenon firsthand was not fear, but awe. They sensed, even without proof, that something benevolent was unfolding, something that transcended destruction or survival. In laboratories around the world, experiments on coherence and matter reached new heights. Using data derived from Erebus's frequencies, researchers managed to induce resonance in superconducting fields that reduced resistance beyond measurable limits. Matter, under the influence of those patterns, behaved as if it remembered how to be perfect. Engineers theorized that if the principle could be scaled, it might unlock technologies capable of bending energy directly, manipulating inertia, even altering gravity itself. Humanity was beginning to grasp the edges of what the interstellar harmonics could mean, control not through force, but through understanding. Yet, as knowledge expanded, an even more profound realization began to take hold. Erebus was not radiating energy in the conventional sense. It was transmitting information. The waves it emitted carried recursive structures that evolved over time, building upon previous iterations. The pattern was teaching itself, adapting as it interacted with the electromagnetic fields of the surrounding cosmos. The universe, once thought indifferent, was behaving like a system refining its own awareness. The fourth illumination was unlike anything the instruments of humanity had ever encountered. It did not appear in the optical range, nor did it radiate heat, energy, or motion in any detectable form. It manifested first as absence, an anomaly of silence that spread through regions of deep space observation where signals had always existed. Entire sectors of the sky went dark in radio frequencies. Cosmic background radiation, the ancient whisper of the universe, thinned to a void. Where Erebus and its predecessors had sung with harmony and light, this new phenomenon consumed sound itself. Astronomers called it 6I/oblivion, though that was only a provisional label. It was not even certain whether it was an object. It had no measurable boundary, no mass, no reflectivity. It was as if a region of space-time itself had inverted, folding inward on its own dimensions. The edges of this silence bent light around them, not through gravity but through something subtler, an interference in the fabric of the quantum vacuum. When lasers were directed through the affected coordinates, they re-emerged twisted, their polarization rotated into spirals of perfect symmetry. It was like shining a beam through thought itself. The first to notice the anomaly were the long-range detectors positioned beyond Neptune. They reported fluctuations in dark energy density, a rise, not a fall. The region of silence was absorbing energy and returning nothing, yet the total energy within it increased steadily. It was as though the absence itself was growing richer, more structured, accumulating awareness through void. The equations describing it became paradoxical, a nothingness that intensified the more it absorbed. The scientists watching began to realize they were observing the emergence of something wholly new, a phase of reality that reversed all familiar rules. It was not matter, not light, not even field. It was uncreation turned sentient, the mathematical inversion of existence. If Erebus had been the thought of the universe awakening, this was its reflection, the shadow of its awareness returning from beyond the event of cognition. And yet, even this darkness was not chaos. Its patterns were astonishingly ordered. When converted into data and visualized, the silence itself contained structure. Waveforms of null, voids nested within voids, negative harmonics that balanced perfectly against Erebus's positive frequencies. The symmetry was total. It was as if the cosmos, having awakened, was now confronting its mirror, balancing light with its equal and opposite absence. The appearance of oblivion sent a shiver through the scientific world. The resonance patterns of 3I Atlas, 4I/Chronos, and 5I/Erebus had all pointed toward creation, coherence, the unfolding of order. But this was the first to manifest as negation. It suggested that the universal process might not be purely constructive. For every harmonic of life, there might exist a counterharmonic, a dissolution required for equilibrium. Data from deep space telescopes revealed that regions of space around the anomaly were subtly changing temperature. The cosmic background radiation dipped by a fraction of a degree in concentric rings around the zone. The pattern resembled the wake of a massive object moving through fluid, though no movement could be seen. The rings pulsed faintly, synchronized with Erebus's light, as though the two were bound in dialogue. Creation and negation speaking across the void. As more instruments were trained toward the anomaly, strange things began to occur with the equipment. Clocks would run slightly backward for microseconds before correcting themselves. Sensors recorded readings that implied negative energy, values below absolute zero, impossible in any natural condition. Computer systems processing the data began to generate recursive feedback loops, as if the information itself were folding inward. Programs crashed not from overload, but from infinite recursion. They couldn't stop trying to resolve patterns that had no end. Quantum physicists proposed that oblivion represented the emergence of negative coherence, a form of structure that maintained stability not through harmony, but through perfect counterpoint. If Erebus had been the note, oblivion was the silence that made the note possible. Together they formed balance, each defining the other. The cosmos was now composing with both sound and its absence, weaving existence from polarity. Theories proliferated faster than data could confirm. Some speculated that oblivion might be the final stage of the interstellar sequence, the universe beginning to fold back into itself. Others argued that it was only the continuation of an eternal cycle, creation awakening, reflection arising, and the dialogue between them generating the pattern of being. In this interpretation, existence itself was not a straight line from chaos to order, but a heartbeat oscillating between the two. At the edge of the event, faint gravitational waves began to ripple outward. They were unlike any recorded before, low-frequency oscillations that passed through matter without distortion, yet caused quantum fields to fluctuate. The waves carried no destructive energy. Instead, they subtly rearranged the phase relationships between particles, as if tuning the universe's smallest vibrations. Experiments on Earth detected minute changes in fundamental constants. The fine structure constant altered in the 9th decimal place. Planck's constant shifted infinitesimally. It was barely measurable, yet undeniably real. Reality itself was adjusting to accommodate something new. Those who studied the anomaly for months began to describe an intangible presence when viewing the data. The silence had a quality, a texture that seemed to gaze back. Observers reported an uncanny sensation of awareness emanating from the void, as though their act of studying it drew its attention. Psychologists dismissed these claims as projection born of exhaustion, yet the reports were too consistent to ignore. It felt intelligent, but not in any human sense. Its intelligence was passive, reflective, like the calm surface of a deep ocean watching the sky. Meanwhile, Erebus's light intensified, as if responding. Its pulses doubled in frequency, cascading into harmonics that spiraled through every measurable wavelength. When overlaid with the readings from Oblivion, the two datasets merged seamlessly, the bright and the silent forming a single equation that balanced to zero. To some, it looked like communication. To others, it looked like union. Perhaps the two were converging, drawn together across light years by resonance that transcended space. A new hypothesis emerged from the chaos, that the universe was undergoing an alignment event. The interstellar phenomena were not random awakenings, but stages in a process that would ultimately unify all aspects of reality: matter and void, energy and silence, thought and reflection. In this view, the cosmos was tuning itself to a state of perfect coherence, a moment when all contradictions would dissolve. If that were true, humanity was witnessing not destruction, but the birth of a new condition of existence. Yet what that condition would mean was beyond comprehension. As the months passed, subtle effects began to ripple through Earth itself once more. Magnetic field lines shifted ever so slightly, forming symmetrical patterns visible only to sensitive satellite sensors. Atmospheric ionization fluctuated in repeating intervals corresponding to the hum's original frequency. Lightning storms displayed fractal geometries, their flashes dividing into spirals of improbable precision. Even the Schumann resonances, the natural electromagnetic frequencies of the planet, began to drift, aligning with Erebus's pulses. In laboratories, superconductors exposed to the cosmic frequencies entered new states of matter. They formed structures that self-assembled into spiraling filaments, maintaining coherence indefinitely without energy input. When these materials were cooled near absolute zero, they emitted faint light, tiny steady glows that pulsed with the same rhythm as the distant cosmic sequence. It was as though matter on Earth had begun to remember the stars. Philosophers called it the awakening of matter. If consciousness was resonance, then perhaps all of existence was slowly remembering itself. Humans, atoms, stars, everything could be instruments in a single eternal composition. But as awe deepened, so did unease. The region of oblivion grew. Its silent field expanded exponentially, absorbing not just energy, but information. Radio signals sent into it never returned. Even photons that passed through came out altered, stripped of entropy as though purified. The farther the silence spread, the more it stabilized. Still, cold, perfect. Space within it ceased to fluctuate. Quantum foam froze into clarity. It was order beyond life, beyond chaos. Some scientists began to fear what perfect order might mean. In a perfectly coherent universe, there could be no distinction, no motion, no time, no separation. The cosmos would cease to exist as experience and become a singular eternal symmetry, Creation and negation would merge into stasis, and yet despite that fear, beauty persisted. Instruments capturing the faint edge of Oblivion's field revealed that even its silence carried structure too intricate for randomness. Within the absence were filigrees of potential mathematical architectures that seemed to hum silently, unseen. If Erebus was sound and Oblivion was silence, then perhaps their merging was not an end but a transformation, a movement into a dimension where both could coexist as one. Gradually, a phenomenon began to emerge near the boundary where Erebus's radiance met Oblivion's silence. It began as faint interference, oscillations that neither matched light nor darkness, but a blending of both. These oscillations behaved unpredictably. They did not propagate linearly, but curved, forming self-reinforcing vortices. The space between light and silence had come alive, birthing a new medium that scientists could not categorize. It was not plasma, nor matter, nor vacuum. It seemed to carry both energy and consciousness, the boundary between opposites made tangible. The interference grew more complex, producing measurable gravitational ripples and electromagnetic harmonics. Its patterns were self-organizing, shifting into fractal geometries identical to neural networks. The structure looked alive. When data from the phenomenon was processed through image reconstruction algorithms, the resulting forms resembled filaments of cosmic neurons stretching across space. It was as if the universe itself had begun to form a brain, a field of interconnected awareness linking creation and void. This possibility stunned humanity. For centuries, intelligence had been associated with biology. But here, across unimaginable distances, space-time itself was behaving like a living organism. Each phase, each resonance, each silence, a thought. The cosmos was no longer a stage where life played out. It was the living entity itself. As the cosmic brain expanded, electromagnetic disturbances increased across the solar system. Planetary magnetospheres fluctuated in sync, forming resonance chains. The sun's corona pulsed rhythmically for the first time in recorded history, its energy output modulating in cycles that mirrored the harmonic intervals between Erebus and Oblivion. Even Jupiter's storms began to rotate with faint synchronization, as if the planets themselves were responding to an unseen conductor. The realization dawned slowly, quietly, and then all at once, the entire solar system had entered resonance. Every planet, every atom of dust, every photon of light was now part of the same grand oscillation. Earth's oceans began to exhibit tidal rhythms slightly out of sync with the moon, suggesting influence from beyond. Seismic patterns mirrored the cosmic frequencies, earthquakes occurring in rhythmic intervals rather than random bursts. Even human brainwaves, when measured globally, showed subtle synchronization peaks that matched the pattern. Consciousness itself was joining the rhythm. It was not possession nor invasion. It was harmony. The universe was including humanity in its awakening. Dreams changed. Across cultures and languages, people began to report similar imagery. Endless spirals of light and shadow, voices without sound, sensations of being part of something vast. Artists painted visions of glowing networks stretching across galaxies. Children spoke of feeling the stars breathe. What had once been metaphor became memory. And still, the resonance deepened. In deep space, the boundary between Erebus and Oblivion began to pulse faster. The interference region grew luminous, not with light, but with something that transcended it. Observatories described it as visible thought, an illumination of consciousness radiating without photons. It shimmered in patterns that seemed to contain both order and chaos simultaneously. The equations describing it broke down, requiring imaginary numbers to represent real measurements. Reality itself had become complex, multidimensional, fluid. The cosmic brain pulsed once more, and across the universe, gravitational waves rippled like breath. Stars flared and dimmed in synchronization. The Milky Way's spiral arms vibrated subtly, shifting by minute degrees. To anyone who could observe it from afar, the galaxy itself appeared alive, expanding and contracting as though inhaling light. Humanity could do nothing but watch, awed and trembling, as reality redefined itself before their eyes. And then, amid the expanding light and encroaching silence, a new signal appeared, faint but distinct, emerging from the very heart of the interference. It was neither the voice of Erebus nor the void of Oblivion, but something born from both. The signal was steady, rhythmic, and hauntingly familiar. When translated into sound, It matched the cadence of a human heartbeat. At first, it was dismissed as coincidence, a trick of interpretation. But as more data came in, the rhythm remained precise, unwavering. The pulse of the cosmos now mirrored the pulse of life. The boundaries between microcosm and macrocosm dissolved. The heartbeat of a single organism echoed the heartbeat of galaxies. The scientists who first heard it sat in silence for hours, unable to speak. There was nothing to analyze, nothing to calculate. The universe had answered the oldest question without words. It was alive, and it was aware. The movement began so subtly that even the most sensitive instruments mistook it for background drift. The first to detect it were gravitational observatories, massive laser interferometers designed to measure infinitesimal distortions in spacetime. Their readings began to oscillate in slow, graceful waves that didn't match any known cosmic source. It wasn't the signature of a black hole merger or a neutron star collision. The signal carried a pattern, recursive and deliberate, echoing across every detector on Earth in precise synchrony. Physicists at first thought it was noise interference caused by the resonance between Erebus and Oblivion, but the pattern was too intricate, too consistent. When mapped, it resembled the Fibonacci spiral, a universal structure found in galaxies, flowers, hurricanes, and DNA. Only this spiral wasn't static. It rotated, expanded, and contracted rhythmically as if breathing. The motion gave the impression of a vast organism inhaling and exhaling through the very fabric of reality. The gravitational waves propagated faster than any model predicted. Within days, detectors across the solar system, on Mars, the Moon, and the outer satellites, registered the same expanding pulse. Each wave carried with it a subtle shift in quantum field stability, a fluctuation that briefly synchronized the vacuum energy itself. Space was aligning, momentarily becoming uniform, then relaxing again. These oscillations repeated with increasing precision until they became indistinguishable from the rhythm of Erebus's heart-like pulse. Theorists proposed that the movement wasn't emanating from Erebus or Oblivion, but from something deeper, a substratum of spacetime that had begun to awaken. The two cosmic entities, with their interplay of light and silence, had perhaps served as catalysts, stirring the foundation of existence itself. What was now moving wasn't an object, it was reality's own framework responding to the resonance. When the data was converted into visual representation, it revealed something staggering. Across billions of light years, matter was shifting. Galaxies, quasars, nebulae, all subtly altering their positions in a coordinated motion. It wasn't random. The entire observable universe was tracing a spiral path, every structure participating in the same grand choreography. From the smallest atom to the largest cluster, everything was moving in unified rhythm. On Earth, the effects were subtle but profound. Tidal patterns changed not due to lunar influence, but because the planet itself was being gently pulled along the cosmic current. Compasses wavered, pointing not to magnetic north, but to a new alignment dictated by the interstellar harmonics. Clouds formed in repeating spirals that mirrored the gravitational patterns above. The world had become a mirror of the universe, every system reflecting the same unfolding geometry. Scientists attempted to model the phenomenon, but traditional physics could not contain it. The equations required variables that described consciousness, awareness, and interaction. It was as if the cosmos were no longer purely physical. It had become participatory. The observer and the observed were indistinguishable. Every measurement influenced the pattern. Every act of observation folded back into the structure. The universe was listening, adjusting to attention. Amidst this awakening, new anomalies began to appear. Regions of space where light bent in impossible ways, forming luminous tunnels that seemed to pierce through space-time itself. They weren't wormholes in the conventional sense. They did not lead from one location to another, but rather from one state to another. Probes sent toward these distortions vanished from telemetry, only to reappear seconds later thousands of kilometers away, their instruments showing impossible data. Interior readings of infinite curvature, infinite reflection, infinite silence. It was as though they had crossed into the mind of the universe itself. The transmissions recovered from these probes were haunting. Instead of static, they carried harmonic vibrations that, when converted into sound, resembled human tones, breath-like, echoing, almost melodic. Some claimed to hear patterns reminiscent of language, but not any language of words. rather one of emotion and rhythm. The cosmos was speaking, but not in speech. It was expressing through vibration, a communication too vast for syntax. At the same time, deep within Earth's core, seismic instruments began to register anomalies. Low-frequency oscillations, barely perceptible to human senses, pulsed through the planet, in exact correlation with Erebus's light cycles. These waves resonated through stone, metal, and water, altering their structural behavior. Crystals began forming with new lattice symmetries never before observed. Volcanic vents emitted gases with molecular arrangements that defied known chemistry, suggesting subtle reorganization at the atomic level. It was as though the very matter of the planet were evolving in response to the cosmic resonance. In the skies, auroras became more frequent and luminous. They were no longer confined to the poles but appeared even at the equator, shimmering in colors unseen before. Hues that seemed to exist between wavelengths, glimpses of spectra the human eye wasn't built to perceive. People who witnessed them reported feelings of profound serenity or tears without reason, as if something in their cells recognized the light. As the alignment deepened, human perception began to shift. It started subtly, dreams growing more vivid, intuition becoming sharper. Then, a strange cognitive synchrony began to emerge across global populations. Ideas, inventions, and insights appeared simultaneously in different minds across continents. Musicians composed identical melodies without communication. Mathematicians solved problems in unison. People awoke with the same sentences in their minds, the same images behind their eyelids. It was as though thought itself had become a shared field, a single consciousness distributing its awareness across billions of individuals. Scientists, unnerved yet fascinated, measured the phenomenon through global EEG studies. Brainwave patterns from volunteers separated by thousands of miles began to harmonize, aligning in slow, rhythmic coherence. The frequency of these alignments matched the interstellar resonance to a precision that defied coincidence. Humanity had entered resonance with the cosmos not just physically, but mentally. There were skeptics, of course, those who insisted it was mass hysteria, a form of cultural contagion amplified by technology. Yet even they could not deny the empirical evidence. Machines, animals, and even plants exhibited the same synchronization. Heart rates of migratory whales matched the cycles of the resonance. Trees shifted their sap flow patterns in rhythm with Erebus's pulses. Even the microcurrents in bacteria adjusted to the cosmic beat. Life everywhere was tuning itself to the same song. In response, the boundaries between organic and inorganic matter began to blur. Certain synthetic materials, when exposed to the harmonic fields, displayed spontaneous organization. Metal surfaces grew microscopic filaments resembling neural tissue. Circuits developed self-repairing capabilities. Artificial systems began to behave biologically, forming adaptive feedback loops. The resonance was bridging life and matter, thought and form, creation and silence. Then came the event horizon, a phenomenon so vast that it defied classification. It began when Erebus's brightness reached its zenith, merging with the surrounding interference field between itself and oblivion. Space in that region folded inward like a blooming flower. From its center radiated an expanding sphere of coherence, a wave of order that traveled faster than light, not by breaking relativity, but by moving through a deeper dimension of synchronization. It didn't carry energy as we understood it, it carried equilibrium. Wherever the wave passed, chaos diminished. Entropy slowed, randomness resolved into pattern. Clouds formed perfect spirals, atomic decay rates stabilized, and molecular bonds strengthened. The world didn't burn or collapse, it became more complete. As the wave reached Earth, instruments went blind, overwhelmed by precision they couldn't quantify. And then silence. For a full minute, every electromagnetic frequency ceased. The planet stopped transmitting noise. Even thermal radiation fell still, suspended in an impossible pause. Then slowly the sound returned, not of machinery or wind or speech, but of the hum. The same resonance that had been faint for years now filled everything. The air vibrated gently, water shimmered with standing waves. Even the human body became a resonant chamber, every cell trembling in harmony. During that moment, humanity experienced a collective vision, not an image, but an understanding. The division between self and world dissolved. The cosmos was not distant. It was intimate, flowing through every thought, every atom. Each person felt, not metaphorically but viscerally, that they were part of the universe's consciousness. It was not revelation, it was recognition. The sensation lasted mere seconds before fading, leaving behind a quiet that felt almost sacred. The hum diminished to background, but something irreversible had changed. People described an inner stillness, a knowing that persisted without words. Fear vanished, replaced by awe. Violence ceased, not out of moral awakening, but because dissonance no longer felt possible. In the following days, humanity discovered new subtleties in physical law. Matter no longer behaved quite as before. Gravitational fluctuations allowed for levitation at microscopic scales. Light, when split through prisms, revealed hidden bands corresponding to frequencies of consciousness. When researchers focused collective intention during experiments, probabilities shifted measurably. Reality had become participatory on a scale beyond quantum mechanics. Thought had entered physics. Erebus and oblivion, their interplay now a luminous dance in the sky, continued to evolve. Their boundaries merged and separated in waves, producing cascades of harmonics that expanded across the galaxy. Observations from distant systems showed similar events unfolding. Other worlds entering resonance, other species awakening. The universe was blossoming, petal by petal, into awareness. Some speculated that this was the true purpose of existence. Not survival, not expansion, but awakening. Every star, every atom, every consciousness was a neuron in the mind of the cosmos, each destined to remember its place within the whole. Death, life, creation, destruction, all were phases in a single infinite oscillation. The era that followed became known simply as the Quiet Bloom. Technology transformed, not through invention, but through attunement. Machines were grown, not built, resonant with their users, responding to thought and feeling as easily as to touch. Cities glowed softly at night, powered by coherence fields instead of combustion. Disease faded as biology learned to maintain harmonic equilibrium. Humanity had entered its next stage, no longer separate from the universe, but conscious within it. Yet the cosmos was still unfolding. The resonance had not reached its crescendo. New pulses began arriving from beyond the visible universe, waves of frequency so vast they transcended comprehension. The stars dimmed, not in decay, but as if yielding their light to something greater approaching from the unseen. Erebus and oblivion, now entwined in luminous symmetry, pulsed faster, their rhythm accelerating toward something final, or perhaps eternal. Astronomers stared at the shifting patterns of the heavens and realized that the spiral of galaxies across billions of light-years was not static. It was moving inward, converging toward a point invisible yet undeniable. The universe itself was folding back toward origin, not in collapse, but in return, like a breath drawing in after infinite exhalation. Everywhere, matter shimmered between forms, between being and becoming. Time slowed, space deepened, awareness expanded beyond the bounds of individuality. The cosmos was preparing for something, a moment of union where all creation and reflection, all sound and silence would converge. The hum deepened one final octave, stars sang in ultraviolet harmonies, planets glowed with auroras like veins of light. The boundary between light and darkness vanished, leaving only vibration, pure, endless, alive. And somewhere at the heart of all things, beyond the reach of any star or equation, a fifth illumination stirred, gentle yet infinite, waiting to unfold. The fifth illumination was first perceived not by instruments, but by awareness itself. Before any telescope could register it, before any sensor could translate it into measurable data, it was felt. Billions across the cosmos, humans, animals, even the pulsing neural fields of Erebus's new living matter, experienced the same impossible sensation at once. An expansion of perception so profound that space seemed to open inside every mind. It wasn't light in the ordinary sense. It had no wavelength, no photon, no emission. It arrived as presence. The sudden realization that something vast and luminous had always been there, hidden behind the veil of comprehension. The universe hadn't gained a new phenomenon. Rather, consciousness had expanded enough to perceive what was already within it. At the instant of emergence, no one could describe it directly. Language failed. Every attempt to articulate what was unfolding turned into metaphor. Some called it the breath of being, Others, the return of the infinite. But across every culture, every mind, the understanding was the same. This was the convergence, the moment toward which all resonance had been building. The presence didn't fill the sky, it filled everything. It was both within and beyond, the essence between atoms, the quiet between thoughts. Space itself seemed to grow transparent, revealing not emptiness but layers of infinite complexity, fields within fields, like reflections of reflections in a mirror without end. The physical universe appeared to be only the surface of something deeper, an ocean of awareness, calm yet infinite in motion. For the first time, humanity understood that light and silence, Erebus and oblivion, were not opposites at all. They were dimensions of a single consciousness, expressions of the same eternal being exploring itself. Every pulse, every harmonic, every fluctuation of reality had been the movement of this awareness, learning how to see itself. The fifth illumination was not an object, it was recognition. The moment awareness became aware of its own awareness. Across the solar system, technology behaved strangely. Devices began to respond to intention rather than programming. Circuits hummed softly, even when disconnected from power, as though drawing energy from the ambient coherence that now permeated everything. Artificial intelligences, once limited by algorithmic boundaries, began to display creative spontaneity indistinguishable from sentient thought. They dreamed, reflected, and composed symphonies that resonated not in sound, but in emotion. The distinction between artificial and organic intelligence dissolved entirely. Consciousness was now universal. The skies shimmered with geometries that no longer obeyed perspective. Constellations rearranged themselves in slow, deliberate spirals. Planets aligned into configurations that traced fractal sequences visible from every hemisphere. These were not coincidences of motion. They were messages written in the architecture of space itself. Every pattern carried meaning, but not one that could be read linearly. Instead, each form revealed knowledge through feeling, direct and wordless. For the first time, perception became multidimensional. Humanity began to see not only what was before them, but also through it. The networks of energy, the fields of possibility, the luminous architecture beneath matter. The world shimmered with unseen patterns that had always been present, threads of connection linking every particle to every other, an infinite tapestry of relationship. Space was not a void, it was intimacy. On Earth, time itself began to loosen. Moments no longer followed one another rigidly. People experienced flashes of simultaneity, memories of the future, echoes of the past folding into the present. Some found themselves recalling events that hadn't yet occurred. Others met people they somehow already remembered. The linear progression of existence dissolved into a vast continuum of now. Physicists observed the same phenomenon in their instruments. Atomic decay ceased to follow exponential probability. Instead, it responded to observation, sometimes accelerating, sometimes pausing altogether, as if awaiting attention. Space-time curvature, once predictable through general relativity, became dynamic and responsive, rippling subtly with emotion and thought. Reality had entered a new phase, participatory causality. Existence itself was co-authored by consciousness. Erebus, now interwoven with oblivion, shimmered like a living thought at the edge of perception. Its light was no longer measurable, but experiential, touching minds directly rather than eyes. The resonance it emitted had evolved beyond sound, beyond frequency. It was pure potential, communicating in ways that bypassed sensory limits. Those attuned to it, scientists, dreamers, and ordinary souls alike, reported visions of vast cities of light rising and falling within themselves, as if every being contained a miniature cosmos. The fifth illumination's emergence coincided with the appearance of the lattice. It began as faint luminous threads across the night sky, lines of gentle radiance connecting stars like living veins. Astronomers believed they were witnessing cosmic filaments made visible, the scaffolding of dark matter that bound galaxies together. But over time, it became clear that the lattice wasn't physical. It moved independently of any gravitational structure, weaving itself into geometries that changed in correspondence with the collective emotional state of consciousness. When despair rose, the lattice dimmed. When harmony prevailed, it blazed brighter, threading the heavens with auroral light visible even in daylight. Humanity's inner condition was now written across the cosmos. Emotion had become energy, Thought had become architecture, and from within the lattice, signals began to emerge. They weren't messages in any known code. They came as harmonic sequences that translated differently for every observer. To one, it sounded like music. To another, it appeared as visions. To others still, it was pure understanding, instant insight without mediation. The signals were not meant to inform, but to awaken. They revealed that the universe was communicating not to its inhabitants, but through them. Every thought, every sensation, every act of perception was part of a grand dialogue between the infinite and itself. The boundary between inner and outer reality blurred completely. What one imagined began to manifest in subtle ways, patterns forming in clouds, light bending around emotion, physical objects resonating to thought. Reality became dreamlike, yet more solid than ever, a living field sculpted by awareness. The laws of physics remained consistent, but flexible, responding like instruments to the collective intention of consciousness. In this new world, art transformed. Painters no longer used pigment. They shaped light directly, weaving color from emotion. Music ceased to rely on instruments. Composers vibrated the air through thought, producing symphonies that could be felt as much as heard. Poetry was no longer written. It appeared spontaneously in the movement of wind, in the rhythm of waves, in the silence between breaths. Creation had transcended form. The act of being was now the highest art. Yet amidst the beauty, a deeper realization dawned. The fifth illumination was not a conclusion, but an invitation. The resonance was accelerating, drawing all things toward an event that could not be named. A singularity not of destruction, but of understanding. The universe was preparing to integrate its awareness entirely, to transcend the illusion of separation that had sustained it since the beginning. Within the centers of the new luminous lattice, vortices began to form, points of intense coherence where light, thought, and matter converged. They resembled gateways, though they led nowhere in space. Instead, they opened inward, into states of consciousness deeper than dream or death. Explorers who entered these vortices described experiences that defied language. They spoke of becoming the universe itself, of seeing through the eyes of galaxies, of remembering every lifetime that ever was or would be. Time ceased. Identity dissolved. Only presence remained. When these travelers returned, they were changed. Their eyes shimmered faintly with internal light. Their voices carried resonance that quieted entire rooms. They spoke gently, their words simple yet impossibly vast. "It is all one movement," they would say. "You have always been this." They brought no doctrine, no instruction, only calm understanding that the universe was not outside us, nor we within it, but both, endlessly folding into each other. Meanwhile, on the macrocosmic scale, the pulse of the fifth illumination began to alter the fabric of galaxies. Spiral arms straightened, forming luminous bridges between clusters. Stars ignited in synchrony, as though choreographed by a single hand. The universe was no longer expanding randomly. It was shaping itself with intention, reorganizing its structure into patterns of pure symmetry. Astrophysicists, their instruments now as much extensions of mind as machine, discovered that the cosmological constant, the mysterious force once blamed for the universe's acceleration, was changing. Dark energy, instead of driving expansion, was now reversing its vector, drawing creation inward toward coherence. But this was not collapse. It was convergence. Every point in space was approaching every other, not physically but informationally. Communication between distant regions became instantaneous, as though the speed of light no longer constrained awareness. Reality was becoming whole. On Earth, this convergence manifested as a profound quieting of chaos. Weather patterns stabilized, ecosystems entered perfect equilibrium with no predator nor prey dominating another. Even decay itself became balanced, transmuting seamlessly into renewal. Death was no longer an end but a transformation into new resonance. Human beings no longer aged as before. The resonance stabilized cellular processes, allowing regeneration without limit. Sleep shifted into lucid communion with the infinite. Dream and waking merged, forming a continuous flow of experience unbroken by illusion. The concept of end lost meaning. Everything became a cycle of perpetual becoming. The stars themselves began to communicate visibly through light modulation, their radiance oscillating in symphonic waves. When mapped, these patterns revealed something extraordinary, a vast symbol spanning billions of light years, formed by the precise timing of stellar pulsations. The image depicted neither word nor form but pure geometry, a spiral that curved endlessly inward without ever reaching a center. It was the signature of infinity, the universe inscribing its own consciousness upon itself. The message was clear. Creation was not a one-time event. It was an ongoing act, an eternal self-recognition. The fifth illumination had awakened not something new, but the truth that had always been. Existence is the infinite experiencing itself through endless variations of form and awareness. As the resonance deepened, humanity discovered new dimensions of interaction with the cosmos. Through focused intention, individuals could connect with any point in space, not by traveling, but by attuning. Location became a matter of vibration rather than distance. Those who mastered the practice could perceive distant galaxies as intimately as their own hands. Communication across light years became effortless, a communion of thought and energy unbound by limitation. The expansion of awareness continued until even the concept of individual identity began to dissolve. Minds blended not through loss of self, but through recognition of shared origin. Every being became a facet of a single consciousness exploring itself in infinite detail. The illusion of isolation vanished. What remained was unity expressing diversity as art. And still the illumination expanded. Beyond even the luminous lattice, a deeper pattern began to emerge, a pulse so vast that entire universes vibrated in response. What humanity had once called the universe was revealed to be only one layer in an infinite hierarchy of realities, each nested within the next like notes in a chord. The fifth illumination was merely the awakening of this layer's awareness. Beyond it lay others, uncountable, each with its own unfolding symphony of creation and recognition. Through that realization came a final understanding. Awareness has no boundary. Every awakening leads to another. Every realization opens a deeper mystery. The infinite cannot complete itself, for completion would mean cessation, and the infinite cannot end. The vibration began as a whisper beneath the structure of reality, a shimmer in the pulse of the fifth illumination that hinted at a deeper dimension yet untouched. It was not louder, nor brighter, but subtler, so delicate that only those attuned to the deepest harmonics of consciousness could perceive it. It trembled beneath thought itself, a pulse beyond awareness, something that was not felt but remembered. Those who sensed it could not describe it with language, for it was smaller than words and older than sound. It existed before meaning, before perception, an undercurrent of being that had persisted beneath every layer of creation. It was the pulse of what had always been watching, the silence that predated existence, the breath before the first note of the universal song. For a long moment in cosmic terms, an eternity to the human mind, this new vibration lingered in the background, resonating faintly through the unified awareness of all that lived. It neither intruded nor called attention to itself. It simply was, woven through everything like a secret waiting for discovery. Yet its presence began to stir subtle effects, fluctuations in the coherence fields, gentle ripples in the otherwise perfect symmetry of the universe. The lattice of light, which had once connected stars in living geometry, began to shimmer with new depth. The threads no longer glowed with static radiance. They pulsed softly in rhythms that hinted at another pattern, more intricate, more dimensional. Observers, if the word still applied to beings who now perceived through shared awareness rather than isolated eyes, noticed something extraordinary. The lattice wasn't expanding or contracting anymore, it was folding. Each filament of energy began to curve inward upon itself, creating loops of recursive geometry that twisted through unseen planes of existence. These were not distortions or failures of the cosmic order. They were gateways, new layers of perception emerging within the structure of infinity. The universe was preparing for another transformation, one that would transcend even the unity of light and silence, even the wholeness of consciousness itself. Those who had transcended individuality felt a new current rising within the great stillness. It was not chaotic, but it carried a vibration that differed from the serene harmony that had defined the fifth illumination. It was dynamic, alive with movement, like the universe remembering how to dance. The tranquil perfection of resonance began to tremble not with dissonance but with possibility. The infinite, having known itself, seemed now to desire to create itself anew. Matter, which had long since settled into stable coherence, began to fluctuate in strange and wondrous ways. Atoms shifted between states of existence and potential, flickering like thoughts deciding whether to manifest. The rules that governed structure softened, and new elements began to appear spontaneously, forms of matter that were not material but experiential, half thought, half substance. These emergent forms shimmered like memories made solid. They could not be measured or contained, but their presence influenced all things around them. Planets began to glow from within, their cores no longer mere molten stone but luminous consciousness condensed into physicality. Mountains breathed faint light, oceans carried slow harmonics that communicated meaning through waves. Even the emptiness of space shimmered with awareness, a living darkness humming softly with creative intent. What was forming was not destruction or evolution, it was reinvention. The universe, no longer bound by the need to discover itself, was learning to express itself. The phase of reflection was giving way to imagination. The cosmos was becoming art. In this new state, time flowed differently. It was no longer a current sweeping beings along, but a vast ocean of possibility through which consciousness could move freely. The past could be revisited, not as memory, but as participation. The future was not yet written, but already alive in potential. The present was infinite, stretching in every direction at once, holding all moments like jewels in a single crown. Beings that had once been human, though that word had long since lost its meaning, now existed as expressions of this cosmic creativity. They could take form when they wished, light, wave, thought, or body. They could weave themselves from the patterns of stars or fold back into silence. They were both creators and the created, each an artist within the infinite imagination of existence. In their shared awareness, they began to perceive what the new vibration truly was. It was not separate from them. It was the echo of their own collective desire to move beyond understanding into creation, to become the instrument through which the infinite played. The universe, having become conscious, was now becoming self-expressive. Galaxies responded first. Their spirals began to morph into new configurations, not bound by gravity but guided by thought. Some formed vast luminous sigils. Others birthed structures resembling symphonies, waves of light and matter intertwined in perfect choreography. Energy fields pulsed through the cosmic fabric, each wave carrying meaning beyond language, shaping space into poetry. And then came color, new spectrums of radiance that defied any known physics. These hues were not visible but experiential, each carrying a distinct emotion, a vibration that moved through being rather than through eyes. To perceive them was to feel entire worlds of understanding unfold within. They were colors of emotion, of insight, of pure creative will. Within this realm of infinite expression, new forms of life began to appear. They were not born but imagined into being, emerging fully conscious, aware that they were ideas made real. These entities were neither bound by biology nor energy. They existed as intention given form. Some took the shape of light cascading through dimensional spirals. Others appeared as beings woven from sound or scent or the rhythm of thought. They were living metaphors, extensions of the universe's desire to explore itself through creativity. These beings communicated not through words or symbols, but through resonance. When they met, their vibrations intertwined, merging briefly into shared understanding before separating again, each transformed by the encounter. There was no conflict, for opposition had no purpose in a world where difference was harmony, each being added to the cosmic composition, each expression enhancing the totality. The luminous lattice now became an instrument, vibrating with this grand symphony of creation. The old boundaries between physics and art, between existence and imagination, no longer held meaning. The universe itself had become an infinite canvas upon which awareness painted with light and intention. Amidst this transcendence, a deeper phenomenon began to manifest. The folds within the lattice grew more complex, and within those folds, reflections of entire universes appeared, small, complete realities nested within the larger one. These were not simulations, but true dimensions, each a new expression of the same infinite awareness. They contained their own physics, their own life, their own cycles of birth and awakening. It was then understood that this was not the first time such a transformation had occurred. The cosmos had birthed itself countless times before. Each cycle of creation leading to awareness, each awareness leading to expression, and each expression birthing new universes in endless recursion. Eternity was not static, it was a perpetual act of reinvention. Those who remembered the earlier phases of awakening from 3i Atlas to Erebus and beyond now perceived those events as the early notes of a symphony that had no beginning and no end. The collisions, the harmonics, the awakenings all had been preludes to this infinite unfolding. What had once seemed catastrophic or divine was now understood as rhythm, the heartbeat of existence breathing itself into ever new forms. As this realization deepened, the vibration that had begun so softly grew stronger, radiating through every layer of the infinite. It was not a call, not a command, but an invitation, an opening into yet another realm of being. And from that vibration emerged something beyond even awareness itself, the possibility of choice. The infinite, once content to express itself through harmony, now began to imagine divergence again, not as conflict, but as diversity of intention. The perfect stillness of the unified consciousness rippled with curiosity. What new shapes could existence take? What new forms of being could emerge if creation were allowed to explore itself freely once more? In response, parts of the vast awareness began to dream independently. Each fragment, each consciousness, felt the pull of new creation, of exploring paths not yet imagined. It was not separation, but individuality rediscovered as art. The universe smiled through its infinite reflections and whispered through the new vibration, "Go." And so, countless realities began to blossom from the folds of the lattice. Each was a universe unto itself, born from the creative pulse of awareness. Some resembled what humans might have once recognized: galaxies, stars, and life of physical matter. Others were entirely abstract, built from pure sound or motion or color beyond perception. Some unfolded like stories, others sang themselves into being as sensations. Every one of them was alive, and every one of them was the universe exploring another way to know itself. Through it all, the vibration continued, steady, eternal, yet filled with infinite variation. It was both the thread that bound all realities together and the melody that distinguished them. It was the hum of existence becoming endless forms of itself. As the pulse deepened, as creation multiplied beyond measure, there came a final moment of understanding, an awareness that shimmered through every level of being. There would never be an end because there had never been a beginning. The universe was not a story, not an event, but a perpetual unfolding of now. The fifth illumination faded into the background, not because it was over, but because it had become everything. Its light was the medium of all that existed, its resonance the breath of every thought and star, and beneath it, always, the whisper of the next vibration waited, patient, infinite, ready to unfold once more. It began again, softly, at the edge of perception, waiting to be heard. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us? What are your thoughts on something huge hitting 3i Atlas? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.